Consider, if you will, the Iranian plateau 3,000 years ago. Imagine standing there beneath skies so vast and clear that the stars seem close enough to touch. The land stretches before you mountain passes, cutting through ancient stone, fertile valleys cradling streams that have flowed since the world was young, and deserts where the wind sculpts sand into formations that exist for a moment and then vanish forever. This is a world in motion. Across these highlands, pastoral tribes move with the seasons, following water and grass as their ancestors have done for generations beyond counting. They are not yet empire builders. They are shepherds and horsemen, living in felt tents that can be packed and moved in hours, their wealth measured in livestock, their power in the loyalty of kinsmen. The rhythms of their lives are simple but profound: birth and death, plenty and scarcity, the eternal dance between human ambition and nature's indifference. Among these wandering peoples, one group will change the course of history. They call themselves Persians, and their story begins not in palaces of stone, but in the dust of migration routes, not with crowns, but with the quiet determination of survival. The Persians came from far away. Their ancestors rode from the steppes of Central Asia, those vast grasslands where the horizon seems to curve with the earth itself, where a man on horseback can ride for days and see nothing but endless sky and waving grass. They were Indo-European speakers, distant cousins to peoples who would settle everywhere from India to Ireland, carriers of languages that would evolve into Sanskrit, Greek, Latin, and dozens of tongues still spoken today. But that grand linguistic family tree mattered little to them. What mattered was finding land, water, and safety in an uncertain world. By the 9th century before the Common Era, these Persian tribes had settled in a region they would name Persis, a land of rugged beauty in what we now call southern Iran. Picture it: valleys sheltered by mountains that turn purple in the evening light, rivers that run silver in the spring melt, highlands where the air is so thin and pure that every breath feels like a gift. Here, the Persians learned to breed horses, magnificent animals, strong and swift, capable of carrying a warrior across tremendous distances. They developed skills in metalwork, crafting bronze and then iron into tools and weapons. They built modest settlements, nothing grand, just clusters of homes where families could gather and children could grow. But they were not free. The Persians lived as vassals to a greater power, the Median Empire, whose kings ruled from Ecbatana in the north. The Maids were their linguistic cousins, fellow Iranian peoples who had achieved dominance through earlier military success and strategic positioning. To be a Persian in those days was to acknowledge Median supremacy, to send tribute north, to provide horsemen when Median kings made war. It was a subordinate existence, yet not without dignity. The Persians maintained their own chieftains, their own customs, their own proud sense of identity. Among the Persian nobility, one clan stood above the rest. They called themselves the Achaemenids, tracing their lineage back to a semi-legendary ancestor named Achaemenes. Whether this founding father truly existed or was a mythological construct matters less than what the name represented: a claim to ancient pedigree, to noble blood, to the right to lead. The Achaemenid clan produced warriors and chieftains who commanded respect, who understood both the arts of war and the subtler arts of leadership. In the mid-7th century before the Common Era, an Achaemenid chief named Teispes ruled in Persis. He was, by all accounts, a capable leader who expanded Persian territory and established his family's prominence. When he died, his realm was divided between his two sons, as was the custom. One son, Cyrus I, received Anshan, the more significant portion. From Cyrus descended the line that would shake the world. His son, Cambyses I, inherited this legacy and would father the man who would transform the Persians from vassals into masters. But before we reach that revolution, we must understand what it meant to be Persian in those early days. We must feel the weight of their subordination and the strength of their traditions, for both would shape the empire they would build. The Persians revered fire, not as a god, precisely, but as something sacred, a manifestation of purity, truth, and divine presence. When darkness fell across their settlements, fires blazed, and around those flames families gathered. The crackling flames provided warmth against mountain cold, light against the pressing darkness, and something more difficult to name, a sense of connection to powers beyond human understanding. Fire consumed impurity. Fire transformed. Fire endured through the night and could be carried forward to kindle new flames. In this simple element, the Persians saw a metaphor for existence itself. Their religious beliefs were evolving during these centuries, influenced by a remarkable figure named Zoroaster, or Zarathustra in their own language. This prophet, who may have lived in the centuries before Persian prominence, preached a revolutionary doctrine. He spoke of one supreme deity, Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, creator of all that is good. Opposing this divine force was Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, source of chaos and evil. Between these cosmic powers, the universe unfolded as a battleground where human beings must choose sides through their thoughts, words, and deeds. Consider the boldness of this vision. In a world where most peoples worshipped pantheons of quarreling gods and goddesses, where divine favor seemed arbitrary and capricious, Zoroaster proposed something different, a moral universe where individual choices mattered, where good and evil were real and distinct forces, where humans were not mere playthings of the gods but participants in a cosmic struggle. The righteous would be rewarded in an afterlife, the wicked punished. This was not yet monotheism, as we might understand it, for lesser divine beings still played roles in Zoroastrian thought, but it pointed toward something unprecedented: ethical religion, based on individual moral responsibility. Not all Persians embraced Zoroastrianism immediately or completely. Religious transformation moved slowly, blending new ideas with ancient practices, but the concept spread, shaping Persian thought in subtle and profound ways. The emphasis on truth, on the distinction between good and evil, on the responsibility of rulers to uphold justice, these ideas would later define Persian kingship and set their empire apart from others. For now, though, the Persians remained humble vassals, their greatest men still subordinate to Median kings. They bred their horses with care, treating horsemanship not merely as a practical skill but as an art form, almost sacred in its significance. A Persian boy learned to ride almost before he could walk, learned to shoot a bow from horseback, learned the honor codes that governed warriors. These were peoples of the saddle and the spear, tough and resilient, shaped by highlands where survival demanded strength. They lived in extended family groups where loyalty to clan superseded almost every other obligation. A Persian's word was his bond. Literally, truth-telling was considered the highest virtue, and to be called a liar was among the gravest insults. They valued courage in battle, but also courage in governance, the bravery to speak truth to power, to stand by commitments, even when circumstances changed. These values might seem quaint or naive to modern sensibilities, but they formed the bedrock of Persian identity. Their material culture was modest by the standards of the great civilizations around them. While Babylon built ziggurats that touched the clouds, and Egypt raised pyramids that defied time itself, the Persians constructed practical buildings, fortified settlements, nothing monumental. Their wealth lay in their herds, their strength in their warriors, their future in their discipline and unity. In those days, the Median Empire dominated the region. The Medes had conquered Assyria, that brutal empire whose armies had terrorized the Near East for centuries with their policy of mass deportation and calculated terror. When Assyrian power finally collapsed in the late 7th century before the Common Era, the Medes claimed much of their territory. Media was now the preeminent power in the Iranian world, and its king, Cyaxares, had proven himself a formidable military leader. The Persians watched and learned. They saw how the Medes organized their forces, how they managed subject peoples, how they balanced coercion with co-option. They served in Median armies, fought in Median wars, absorbed military knowledge and strategic thinking. And they waited. By the mid-6th century before the Common Era, the Median throne had passed to Astyages, grandson of Cyaxares. Astyages was a capable enough ruler, but his reign would face a challenge from an unexpected core to his own family. For Astyages had a daughter, Mandane, and in a diplomatic marriage typical of ancient politics, he had wed her to a Persian noble named Cambyses I, the Achaemenid chief who ruled Anshan. From this union, a son was born around 590 before the Common Era. They named him Cyrus Kurush in the Persian language. This child would grow into the man who would shatter Median supremacy, unite Persian and Median peoples under one banner, and launch an imperial project that would stretch from the Mediterranean Sea to the mountains of Central Asia. But in those early years beneath the stars of Persis, as young Cyrus learned to ride and shoot, as he absorbed the honor codes and the fire worship and the clan loyalties of his people, the future was not yet written. The Persians were still vassals, still subordinate, still waiting for their moment. The ancient Iranian plateau slept under endless skies, its peoples moving through their seasonal rounds, tending their herds, lighting their sacred fires against the darkness. The mountains stood eternal, unchanged by human ambition. The rivers flowed as they had always flowed, and in the Achaemenid halls a young prince grew toward manhood, carrying in his lineage both Persian independence and Median royal blood, uniquely positioned to bridge two peoples and forge something unprecedented. The world did not know it yet, but an earthquake was building. The nomadic shadows were about to step into the light of history. The age of Persian kings was dawning, and when it arrived, nothing would be the same. Imagine those nights in Persis, the fires burning low, the elders telling stories of ancestors who rode from distant steppes, the young men listening and dreaming of glory. Somewhere in those gatherings Cyrus sat and listened, absorbing the tales of Persian pride and Median dominance, feeling perhaps the first stirrings of ambition that would remake the world. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human dreams, ancient beyond reckoning. But beneath those stars, history was gathering itself, preparing to surge forward with the force of an avalanche, carrying the Persians from obscurity to mastery, from vassals to conquerors, from humble horsemen to the rulers of the greatest empire the world had yet seen. The stage is set, the actors are in place, the ancient rhythms of pastoral life continue, but they will not continue forever. Change is coming, swift and irrevocable as a desert storm. The question is no longer whether the Persians will rise, but how high they will climb, how far their reach will extend, and what kind of empire they will build when they finally break their chains. The answer lies ahead, in the extraordinary life of Cyrus the Great, and the empire he will forge from rebellion, brilliance, and an unprecedented vision of what conquest could mean. But that story begins with a single act of defiance, one man refusing to accept the subordination of his fathers, one leader deciding that the time had come for Persia to emerge from the shadows and claim its place in the sun. The dawn is breaking. Can you sense it? Across the Iranian plateau, as morning light touches mountain peaks and spills down into valleys where Persian horsemen are already stirring, a new age is about to begin. The year is 550 before the Common Era, and the world is about to witness something extraordinary. In Persis, the vassal kingdom that has bent the knee to Median overlords for generations, a prince has decided that subordination ends now. His name is Cyrus, and he carries in his veins both Persian pride and Median royal blood, grandson of Astyages, the Median king through his mother Mandane. This dual heritage might have made him the perfect bridge between two peoples, a loyal governor content to serve. Instead, it makes him dangerous. What drives a man to rebellion? What transforms a vassal prince into a revolutionary who will overturn the order of nations? We can speculate about personal ambition, about perceived slights, or political calculations, but perhaps it is simpler than that. Perhaps Cyrus looked at his people, skilled warriors, proud horsemen, bearers of an ancient lineage, and saw no reason why they should remain perpetually subordinate. Perhaps he understood something that his grandfather did not, that loyalty built on conquest alone is fragile, but loyalty built on shared purpose and respect can move mountains. The revolt begins not with a massive army, but with words and alliances. Cyrus is young, perhaps 40 years old, and he possesses that rare gift of making people believe in possibilities they had not dared to imagine. He speaks to Persian chiefs and nobles, reminding them of their heritage, their capabilities, their right to self-determination. One by one, they commit their warriors to his cause. But Cyrus understands that Persians alone cannot defeat the Median Empire. He needs something more. And here we see the first glimpse of the strategic genius that will define his reign. Rather than viewing all Medes as enemies, Cyrus appeals to disaffected Median nobles, to generals who feel undervalued by Astyages, to subject peoples who chafe under Median rule. His message is radical in its simplicity. What if we built something better together? What if conquest did not mean subjugation but partnership? When Astyages learns of his grandson's rebellion, he is furious but not yet alarmed. After all, Media has crushed rebellions before. He assembles his army and marches south, confident that this Persian upstart will be quickly subdued. But the Median king has miscalculated terribly. His own general, a man named Harpagus, harbours a deep grudge. The sources tell us that Astyages once forced Harpagus to eat his own son as punishment for a perceived betrayal. Whether this horrific tale is literally true or symbolic of some terrible wrong, the result is clear. Harpagus leads a significant portion of the Median army over to Cyrus's side. The defection changes everything. Suddenly, Cyrus commands not just Persian horsemen but Median infantry, experienced soldiers who know their former king's tactics intimately. The civil war that follows is brief but decisive. At a battlefield whose exact location is lost to time, Persian and Median forces loyal to Cyrus face the remaining army of Astyages. The fighting is fierce. These are peoples who know how to wage war, but the outcome is never truly in doubt. By day's end, Astyages is a prisoner, his army shattered, his empire finished. And here, Cyrus makes a choice that will define everything that follows. He does not execute his grandfather. He does not humiliate him, parade him in chains, or inflict the ritual degradations that victorious kings typically impose on defeated rivals. Instead, Cyrus treats Astyages with respect, provides for his comfort, and demonstrates mercy. It is a calculated gesture, certainly, but also a genuine expression of Cyrus's governing philosophy. He has not conquered the Medes to destroy them, but to unite them with Persians in a common enterprise. The unification happens remarkably smoothly. Cyrus declares himself king of both Persians and Medes, creating a hyphenated empire where both peoples retain their dignity and identity. Median nobles keep their positions, Median cities remain prosperous, Median culture is respected and preserved. This is conquest without annihilation, victory without vengeance. The Medo-Persian Empire is born, and it will prove to be merely the beginning. Look at what Cyrus has achieved by 550 before the Common Era. He has transformed himself from vassal to king, united two great Iranian peoples, and created a power base formidable enough to challenge any force in the Near East. But empires are not built through defensive consolidation. Empires expand, and Cyrus has the vision and ambition to expand farther than anyone has dared imagine. To the west lies the kingdom of Lydia, in what is now western Turkey. Lydia is wealthy beyond measure, enriched by trade routes connecting Europe and Asia, blessed with gold deposits that have made its capital, Sardis, synonymous with opulence. The Lydian king, Croesus, is legendary for his wealth even today. We speak of being rich as Croesus when describing extraordinary prosperity. Croesus has built alliances with Greek city-states, with Egypt, with Babylon. He believes himself secure, protected by geography, wealth, and powerful friends. But Croesus makes a fatal mistake. Concerned about the rise of Persian power, he consults the oracle at Delphi, that mysterious shrine where priestesses supposedly channel the wisdom of Apollo himself. The oracle delivers an ambiguous prophecy. If Croesus attacks Persia, a great empire will fall. Encouraged, interpreting this as divine endorsement, Croesus mobilizes his forces and marches east in 547 before the Common Era. He could not have misread the signs more completely. The great empire that will fall is his own. Cyrus meets the Lydian invasion with characteristic speed and tactical brilliance. The two armies clash in Cappadocia, in central Anatolia, and the battle is savage but inconclusive. As autumn approaches and campaigning season traditionally ends, Croesus withdraws to Sardis, dismissing his mercenary forces and settling in for winter, confident that warfare will resume in spring. This is how civilized kingdoms conduct war, with seasonal rhythms, with pauses for weather and logistics. But Cyrus is not interested in civilized conventions. While Croesus disperses his armies, Cyrus pursues. He drives his forces westward through difficult terrain in forced marches that should be impossible, catching the Lydians completely unprepared. When Persian cavalry appears outside Sardis in the dead of winter, Croesus scrambles to reassemble his forces. The Lydian army includes cavalry renowned throughout the ancient world, powerful horses bearing armored warriors. The battle that follows reveals Cyrus's tactical creativity. Persian scouts have noted that Lydian horses are disturbed by the scent of camels, so Cyrus places his baggage camels in the front ranks, an unusual formation that baffles the Lydians until the charge begins. The Lydian horses panic, rearing and bolting at the unfamiliar scent, throwing formations into chaos. Persian infantry and cavalry exploit the confusion ruthlessly. The Lydian army disintegrates, and Croesus flees behind the supposedly impregnable walls of Sardis. Those walls have never been breached. Sardis sits atop a steep acropolis, accessible only by narrow paths, defended by fortifications. Built over centuries, Croesus believes he can hold out indefinitely while his Greek and Egyptian allies mobilize, but Cyrus has no intention of waiting for spring or reinforcements. He offers a reward to any soldier who can find a way into the city. A Persian scout observes something crucial, a section of wall where the cliffs are so steep that defenders have grown complacent, assuming no one could possibly climb there. He watches a Lydian sentinel accidentally drop his helmet down the cliff, and then carefully descend to retrieve it, revealing a hidden path. That night, a small force of Persian commandos scales the cliff, kills the negligent guards, and opens the gates from within. Sardis falls in 14 days. The impregnable fortress capitulated, the wealthy kingdom conquered, and Croesus, that epitome of wealth and power, now stands before Cyrus as a prisoner. Once again, Cyrus chooses mercy over vengeance. Rather than executing Croesus, he makes him an advisor, valuing the defeated king's knowledge of Greek politics and Western trade routes. It is both pragmatic and principled, this pattern of clemency, and it sends a message across the ancient world: surrender to Cyrus, and you will be treated with dignity. Resist, and you will fall, but even then, honorable treatment awaits. The conquest of Lydia brings enormous wealth into Persian coffers and establishes Persian power on the Aegean coast, bringing them into direct contact with the Greek city-states. But Cyrus is not yet finished. His ambition sweeps eastward toward Central Asia, northward toward the steppes, and most significantly westward toward the greatest prize of all, Babylon. Babylon. The name itself conjures images of wonder and excess. The Hanging Gardens, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, where exotic plants cascade from terraced heights. The Ishtar Gate, with its glazed blue tiles depicting dragons and bulls. The Ziggurat Etemenanki, possibly the inspiration for the Tower of Babel, rising in stepped stages toward heaven. This is one of the world's oldest cities, capital of an empire that traces its lineage back millennia, home to astronomers and astrologers whose observations of the night sky have given us our 7-day week and our division of the circle into 360 degrees. But Babylon in 539 before the Common Era is troubled. The king, Nabonidus, is an eccentric who has alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk, Babylon's patron deity, by favoring the moon god Sin. He has spent years away from the capital, living in the Arabian desert oasis of Tamar, leaving his son Belshazzar as regent. The Babylonian elite priests, merchants, nobles are increasingly disaffected, viewing their king as unreliable and their regent as ineffective. Cyrus understands all this. His intelligence network, those eyes and ears that every successful empire must cultivate, brings him detailed reports of Babylonian internal politics. And so when he moves against Babylon, he does not come merely as a conqueror, but as a liberator, someone who will restore proper worship to Marduk and bring stability to a troubled land. The campaign begins with battles along the border, where Persian forces defeat Babylonian armies with relative ease. Then, Cyrus employs a stratagem that has become legendary, though its details are debated. Babylon sits astride the Euphrates River, which flows directly through the city beneath massive walls that extend into the river itself. These walls are impregnable to conventional assault 40 feet thick, 300 feet high in places, protected by moats and towers. An army could besiege Babylon for years without success, and the city has storehouses sufficient to outlast any siege. But Cyrus notices that the Euphrates is the city's lifeline and potential vulnerability. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, Persian engineers divert the river upstream, channeling it into a pole, reservoir, or marsh. The water level in Babylon drops precipitously. Under cover of darkness during a festival when the city is distracted by celebrations, Persian soldiers wade through the lowered river beneath the walls, emerging inside the city to open the gates. Babylon falls without a major battle, conquered through engineering and intelligence rather than brute force. Other sources suggest a more prosaic explanation, that disaffected Babylonian officials simply opened the gates for Cyrus, welcoming him as the liberator he claimed to be. Perhaps both accounts contain truth, an engineered diversion providing cover for political betrayal. What matters is the outcome. On the 12th day of the month, Tashritu, in 539 before the Common Era, Cyrus enters Babylon in triumph. And what a triumph it is! But not a triumph of pillage and destruction, not a triumph of humiliation and enslavement. Cyrus enters the city peacefully, orders his soldiers to respect the inhabitants and their property, and immediately begins a program of restoration and conciliation. He presents himself as the chosen one of Marduk, the legitimate successor to Babylonian kings, the restorer of proper order. He returns looted statues to temples across the realm. He repairs shrines and honors local gods. Most famously, he frees the Jews. For nearly 50 years, since the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem in 586 before the Common Era, the Jewish elite have lived in exile in Babylon. It is not slavery. Exactly, many have prospered in business and trades, but it is exile nonetheless. Separation from the land they consider divinely promised, from the temple that was the center of their worship. The Psalms of this period overflow with longing. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept. when we remembered Zion. Cyrus issues an edict. The Jews may return to Judah, rebuild their temple in Jerusalem, and restore their worship. He provides financial support for the reconstruction and returns the sacred vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had looted. For the Jewish people, Cyrus becomes a figure of almost messianic significance. The prophet Isaiah, speaking decades earlier but preserved in texts compiled later, calls Cyrus the Lord's anointed one, a remarkable designation for a Gentile king. The gratitude of the Jewish people echoes through centuries, preserved in their sacred texts, a testament to how one man's policy of tolerance created loyalty that would never fade. But Cyrus's magnanimity is not purely altruistic, it is profoundly strategic. By allowing peoples to maintain their religions, languages, and customs, by presenting himself as the restorer of each culture's proper order rather than an alien conqueror, Cyrus builds an empire based on something more durable than fear. Subject peoples have reasons to support Persian rule beyond mere force. Local elites are co-opted rather than destroyed. The empire becomes a framework within which diverse cultures can flourish, united by allegiance to a distant king who nonetheless respects their differences. This vision is codified in one of history's most remarkable documents, the Cyrus Cylinder. Discovered in the ruins of Babylon in 1879 of the Common Era, this clay cylinder covered in cuneiform script contains Cyrus's own account of his conquest. Listen to his words spoken across 2.5 millennia. I am Cyrus, king of the world, great king, mighty king, king of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, the king of the 4 corners of the world. I returned the gods to their sacred centers. I gathered all their peoples and returned them to their settlements. May all the gods whom I have placed in their sacred centers ask daily before Bel and Nabu for a long life for me. The cylinder proclaims a policy of repatriation and religious freedom, presenting Cyrus as the champion of proper worship and the protector of diverse peoples. Modern interpreters have sometimes called it the first declaration of human rights, though this may overstate the case. Cyrus was building an empire, not crafting a philosophical treatise on universal rights. But the document nonetheless reveals a remarkable approach to conquest, one that recognizes diversity as a strength rather than a problem to be eliminated. By the time Cyrus dies in 530 before the Common Era killed in battle against nomadic tribes on the northeastern frontier, still campaigning, still expanding his realm, even in old age, he has created the largest empire the world has ever seen. From the Mediterranean coast to the Hindu Kush mountains, from Egypt's borders to Central Asia's steppes, Cyrus's authority extends over a vast swath of the known world. He has defeated 3 great kingdoms, Media, Lydia, and Babylon. He has freed the Jews, respected Babylonian gods, honored Greek customs, and created a model of imperial governance that will influence rulers for centuries. Consider what he accomplished in a mere 20 years of active conquest. Most conquerors are remembered primarily for the destruction they wreaked and the lives they took. Cyrus is remembered for the lives he spared, the cultures he preserved, the tolerance he demonstrated. He was certainly ruthless when necessary. Those who resisted felt the full force of Persian military might. But whenever possible, he chose clemency over cruelty, integration over obliteration. The ancient Greeks, who would later fight desperate wars against Persia, nonetheless admired Cyrus. Xenophon wrote a fictionalized biography, the Cyropaedia, presenting him as an ideal ruler. Herodotus, the father of history, devoted substantial space to Cyrus's achievements. The Jews revered him as a messiah figure. The Persians themselves treasured his memory as their greatest king. This is a rare accomplishment to be admired by one's own people, by those one conquered, and even by one's future enemies. When Cyrus fell in battle at the age of 60 or thereabouts, fighting against the Massagethae queen Tomyris In a campaign that even his advisors had warned was overreach, the empire mourned. They brought his body back from that distant frontier and laid him to rest in a simple tomb at Pasargadae, the capital he had founded in Persis. The tomb still stands, a modest stone structure on a stepped platform, bearing an inscription that captures the essence of the man. "I am Cyrus, who founded the empire of the Persians. Grudge me not, therefore, this little earth that covers my body." Little earth indeed, for a man who reshaped the ancient world. From nomadic horsemen to masters of an empire spanning 3,000 miles, the Persians had risen farther and faster than seemed possible, and they had done it following a leader whose vision transcended simple conquest, who understood that the truest power comes not from destroying what exists, but from organizing it into something greater. The Persian Empire was born in thunder and lightning, in the clash of cavalry charges and the fall of ancient cities. But it was sustained by something subtler, the realization that diverse peoples could be united without being homogenized, that empire could mean something other than oppression, that a king could be both conqueror and liberator. Cyrus the Great had set the standard. The question now was whether his successors could maintain it, whether they could preserve and expand the empire he had built, whether they could honor his legacy of strength tempered with mercy. The answers would unfold across generations, through triumphs and disasters, through moments of brilliance and episodes of folly. But in 530 before the Common Era, as the Persian Empire stretched across the horizon and Cyrus was laid to rest in his modest tomb, one thing was clear: the world had changed forever. The age of Persian kings was no longer dawning, it had arrived in full force, and its light would illuminate the ancient world for more than 2 centuries to come. The thunder had sounded, the empire was born, and the story was far from over. When a great man dies, the world holds its breath. What comes next? Can the vision survive its visionary? Can the edifice stand without its architect? These are the questions that face every empire at the moment of succession, and the Persian Empire in 530 before the Common Era is no exception. Cyrus's son, Cambyses II, inherits the throne. He is not his father, few sons are, but he is capable, ambitious, and determined to expand what Cyrus built. He faces an empire that stretches across much of the known world, but has one glaring gap: Egypt. That ancient civilization, older than Babylon, older than any kingdom the Persians have yet conquered, remains independent under the pharaoh Amasis. Egypt is wealthy, culturally sophisticated, militarily formidable, and strategically vital. Whoever controls Egypt controls the grain supply that feeds nations, the gold mines of Nubia, and the maritime routes connecting the Mediterranean with the Red Sea and beyond. Cambyses begins his preparations methodically. He understands that conquering Egypt requires more than military force. He needs safe passage across the Sinai Desert, that brutal expanse where armies have perished from thirst. He needs naval support to challenge Egyptian ships. He needs diplomatic groundwork to isolate Egypt from potential allies. And so he spends 3 years preparing, securing alliances with Arab tribes who control the desert routes, building a fleet with Phoenician shipwrights, assembling an invasion force of Persians, Medes, and contingents from every corner of his diverse empire. In 525 before the Common Era, Cambyses marches. The Persian army crosses the Sinai, supported by Arab allies who provide water, camels, and guidance through terrain that has destroyed other invaders. When the Persians emerge from the desert and confront the Egyptian army at Pelusium, near the Mediterranean coast, the outcome is decisive. Egyptian forces, despite fighting on their own soil with every advantage of prepared positions, crumble before the Persian assault. The sources tell a peculiar story about this battle, one that reveals something disturbing about Cambyses's character. According to Herodotus, Cambyses ordered cats, dogs, and other animals sacred to Egyptians to be driven before the Persian lines, knowing that Egyptian soldiers would be reluctant to harm these creatures. Whether this tale is literally true or represents a symbolic understanding of Cambyses' willingness to exploit cultural sensitivities, it suggests a man less interested in his father's policy of respect for local customs and more focused on victory by any means necessary. After Pelusium, Egyptian resistance collapses with surprising speed. Pharaoh Amasis dies just before the invasion. Some sources suggest he died upon hearing of Cambyses' approach, as if the news itself was a mortal blow. His son, Psamtik III, rules for mere months before becoming Cambyses' prisoner. Memphis, the ancient capital, falls. The Delta submits. Upper Egypt bends the knee. By the end of 525 before the Common Era, Egypt, a civilization already thousands of years old, which had seen empires rise and fall while maintaining its essential identity, becomes a Persian province. Cambyses has achieved what even his father did not. He has added the oldest continuous civilization in the world to the Persian realm. The empire now stretches from the Aegean to the Hindu Kush, from the Caucasus to the cataracts of the Nile. It is the greatest concentration of human power and wealth the world has ever witnessed. But something goes wrong in Egypt. The sources are contradictory and problematic, written by Greek historians who may have embellished or invented incidents to create a moral tale about hubris. Still, patterns emerge that suggest Cambyses' reign began to unravel in the Egyptian desert. Herodotus tells us that Cambyses killed the sacred Apis bull, a living embodiment of the god Ptah that the Egyptians venerated with elaborate rituals. He supposedly mocked Egyptian religion, desecrated temples, and behaved with contempt toward customs that his father would have respected. He launched an expedition against the Nubian kingdom to the south, but it failed disastrously when supplies ran out and the army had to resort to cannibalism to survive. He sent another force west toward the oasis of Siwa, where the oracle of Amun attracted pilgrims from across the ancient world. But this army disappeared entirely, supposedly swallowed by a sandstorm in the desert, 50,000 men vanishing without a trace. Modern historians debate how much of this is true and how much is Greek propaganda designed to paint Cambyses as a cautionary tale of impiety and madness. The Persians themselves left no detailed accounts of his Egyptian reign. What seems clear is that Cambyses' approach differed from his father's, more confrontational with local elites, less concerned with maintaining the careful balance between imperial authority and cultural respect that had characterized Cyrus's conquests. And then, in 522 before the Common Era, while Cambyses is still in Egypt, news arrives that shakes the empire to its foundations. A usurper has seized the throne in Persia. The pretender claims to be Bardia, Cambyses' younger brother, whom Cambyses had secretly executed before leaving for Egypt, fearing a potential rival. Now someone claiming to be Bardia announces that Cambyses' cruelties have forfeited his right to rule and that a new, more just reign has begun. Cambyses immediately sets out for Persia to crush this rebellion, but he never arrives. He dies in Syria under mysterious circumstances. Sources variously claim suicide, accidental injury, or assassination. The official Persian account, recorded on the Behistun inscription that we will encounter shortly, claims that Cambyses died from an infected wound sustained when his sword accidentally pierced his thigh while mounting his horse. Perhaps this is true, perhaps it is a cover story for darker truths. We may never know. What matters is that Cambyses dies without a clear successor, his brother already dead, his lineage apparently extinguished. The usurper, whether truly Bardia or an impostor named Gaumata, a Magian priest who resembles the dead prince, rules for 7 months. He wins popular support by reducing taxes and granting exemptions from military service, policies that delight the common people, but alarm the noble class, whose wealth comes from tribute and whose power rests on military dominance. The Persian Empire, This magnificent creation, built through decades of conquest and careful governance, teeters on the edge of disintegration. Without legitimate leadership, without the charisma and vision that held diverse peoples together, the centrifugal forces of empire might tear it apart. Satrapies could declare independence. Conquered peoples could revolt. The whole structure could collapse into warring fragments. But then, a man steps forward who will not only preserve the empire, but perfect it. His name is Darius, and he is about to demonstrate that organizational genius can be as transformative as military conquest. Darius is a member of the Achaemenid clan, a distant cousin of Cyrus, a nobleman who served as a spear-bearer in Cambyses' Egyptian campaign. He is perhaps 28 years old when Cambyses dies, young but experienced, ambitious but patient enough to wait for his moment. That moment arrives when he and 6 other Persian nobles, a council of conspirators united by shared interest in preserving imperial order, decide to overthrow the usurper. The Behistun inscription, carved into a cliff face in the western Iran, where travelers on the ancient highway cannot miss it, tells the official story. In 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, Darius proclaims his legitimacy and his triumph. He explains how the false Bardia Gaumata, the Magian, in his telling deceived the people, and how 7 noble Persians exposed the fraud and killed the usurper. Darius, as the senior member of this conspiracy, by virtue of his Achaemenid lineage, naturally becomes king. The truth is almost certainly more complex. Ancient sources suggest the conspirators entered the palace through a combination of boldness and inside knowledge, found the usurper, and killed him in his chambers. Whether the dead man was truly an impostor or actually was Bardia, whether the conspiracy was defensive or opportunistic, these questions remain debated. What is indisputable is that Darius emerged victorious and moved immediately to consolidate power. But victory was merely the beginning of his challenges. Across the vast empire, rebellions erupted like fires sparked by the same wind. Babylon revolted, claiming its own king. Elam declared independence. Media fragmented. Armenia rose in rebellion. Parthia and Margiana in the east threw off Persian authority. From the Mediterranean to Central Asia, the empire convulsed with separatist movements, each convinced that this moment of confusion represented their chance for freedom. Darius responded with ruthless efficiency. He split his forces, sending trusted generals to crush rebellions in multiple regions simultaneously, while he personally led campaigns against the most dangerous threats. The Behistun inscription catalogues his victories with bureaucratic precision. 19 battles in 1 year, numerous kings defeated, order restored province by province. He fought in Media, in Babylon, in Persia itself. He crossed deserts and mountains, pursued rebel leaders to their final refuges, and re-established Persian authority through a combination of military victory and calculated clemency. Consider the scale of what Darius accomplished. In less than 2 years, he transformed himself from a junior nobleman to undisputed emperor, suppressed empire-wide revolts, and re-established control over territories spanning 3,000 miles. It was a tour de force of military leadership, political acumen, and sheer determination. But Darius understood something crucial. Military victory alone would not preserve the empire. What Cyrus had built through conquest and Cambyses had expanded required something more, a system, a structure, an administrative framework that could function regardless of who sat on the throne. Darius set out to create exactly that. His first great innovation was the satrap system. Darius divided the empire into 20 provinces, each called a satrapy, each governed by a satrap appointed by the king. These were not independent rulers, but royal officials, extensions of the king's will into distant territories. Each satrap collected taxes, maintained order, raised troops when needed, and administered justice according to Persian law. The system combined centralized authority with local flexibility. Satraps had considerable autonomy in daily governance, but remained absolutely accountable to the king. To prevent satraps from becoming too powerful, from transforming into independent kings in all but name, Darius created a brilliant system of checks and balances. Royal inspectors, known as the king's eyes and ears, travelled throughout the empire, observing, investigating, reporting directly to Darius. These inspectors had authority to examine any aspect of provincial governance, to audit tax collections, to interview citizens about their treatment. A satrap who abused his power or harboured ambitions of independence would find himself exposed and replaced, often violently. Darius also established permanent military garrisons in each satrapy, commanded by officers who reported independently to the central government rather than to the satrap. A governor might control civilian administration, but he could not command the army that maintained order in his province. This separation of powers ensured that even ambitious satraps could not easily revolt; they lacked the military force to do so. But perhaps Darius's most impressive achievement was the royal road. Picture this: a highway stretching 1,600 miles from Sardis in the west to Susa in the heart of Persia. Not a dirt track or a caravan route worn by centuries of use, but an actual constructed road with way stations, rest houses, fresh horses, and guards. A royal courier could travel this distance in 7 days, an astonishing speed that connected the empire's far-flung regions with unprecedented efficiency. The royal road was more than infrastructure; it was the nervous system of empire. Orders from Susa reached Sardis in a week. Reports from provincial governors arrived at court while information was still fresh and relevant. Armies could be mobilized and coordinated across vast distances. Trade flourished as merchants traveled secure roads with reliable stations. Information, that most precious commodity of any government, flowed with a speed that gave Persian kings an almost supernatural awareness of their realm. Complementing the road was the postal system, perhaps history's first truly organized government mail service. Herodotus described it with admiration. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Yes, that phrase, later adopted by the United States Postal Service, originated in a Greek historian's description of Persian efficiency. Relay stations every 15 miles provided fresh horses and riders, ensuring that messages moved continuously without the delays inevitable when a single courier had to rest. Darius also standardized the empire's coinage. Before his reforms, different regions used different currencies, different weights and measures, different standards of value. Darius introduced the daric, a gold coin of reliable weight and purity that bore the image of the king as an archer. The daric became trusted currency throughout the ancient world, facilitating trade and making tax collection more efficient. When merchants from India to Greece all accepted the same currency, economic integration followed political integration, binding the empire together through commercial self-interest. Tax reform accompanied monetary standardization. Rather than the irregular tribute and plunder that characterized earlier imperial systems, Darius instituted a regular, predictable tax system. Each satrapy owed a fixed annual amount based on its wealth and population. Babylon paid the most, nearly 1,000 talents of silver annually, while poorer regions paid proportionally less. The system was still extractive, certainly, still designed to transfer wealth from provinces to the imperial center, but its predictability allowed for economic planning and reduced the arbitrary exactions that had characterized conquest-based empires. With wealth flowing into the treasury and administrative systems functioning efficiently, Darius could afford to build, and build he did, creating monuments that would awe visitors for millennia. The greatest of these was Persepolis, a name meaning City of the Persians, constructed on a vast terrace carved from a mountainside in the heartland of Persis. This was not a city in the conventional sense, not a place where ordinary people lived and worked. This was a ceremonial capital, a stage for the great drama of imperial power, a physical manifestation of Persian ideology. Imagine approaching Persepolis from the plain below. First you see the terrace, a platform 40 feet high extending over 30 acres, faced with massive stones fitted together so precisely that even today you cannot slip a knife blade between them. You climb the grand staircase, its steps shallow enough that horses could ascend, and you enter the Gate of All Nations, where massive stone bulls with human heads guard the entrance, and inscriptions in multiple languages welcome visitors from every corner of the empire. Beyond the gate rises the Apadana, the audience hall where the king received tribute and foreign ambassadors. 72 columns soar 65 feet into the air, their capitals carved in the shape of double-headed bulls, griffins, and lions. The columns support a roof that creates a covered space large enough to hold 10,000 people. Light filters through high windows, casting dramatic shadows across the polished stone floor. But it is the walls that truly speak. The Apadana's grand staircases are lined with relief carvings, showing delegates from every nation of the empire bringing tribute to the king. We see them still, Babylonians leading cattle, Lydians carrying vessels of precious metal, Bactrians with camels laden with goods, Indians bringing baskets of gold dust, Ethiopians bearing elephant tusks and leading giraffes. 23 different delegations are depicted, each in their distinctive dress, each bearing gifts representative of their homeland's wealth. The message is unmistakable. All peoples of the earth acknowledge Persian supremacy, but they retain their distinct identities. This is not homogenization but hierarchy, unity in diversity, order encompassing difference. The carvings show a vision of empire as a cosmic order, where every nation has its place, all contributing to the glory of the Persian king who sits at the center of the world. Other buildings complement the Apadana, the Hall of 100 columns, an even larger throne room, the treasury where imperial wealth was stored, residential palaces for the king and his family, administrative buildings where the business of empire was conducted. The entire complex demonstrates Persian wealth, power, and sophistication. This is the work of a civilization at its height, confident in its strength, proclaiming its greatness in stone that would outlast bronze and clay. Yet Persepolis was not merely propaganda. It functioned as the actual ceremonial heart of the empire. Each year during the spring festival of Nowruz, the Persian New Year, delegations from across the empire gathered here to present tribute and renew their allegiance. For those few weeks, Persepolis became the center of the known world, where Greeks met Indians, where Egyptians encountered Sogdians, where the diversity of empire became visible and tangible. The festival reinforced imperial unity while celebrating regional distinctiveness, a delicate balance that Darius understood was essential to holding such a vast realm together. But Darius was not content with consolidation and construction. He too caught the expansion fever that seems to afflict all great kings. He pushed the borders of empire eastward into the Indus Valley, establishing Persian control over what is now Pakistan. The wealth of India, its gold, its exotic goods, its huge population added substantially to imperial resources. Persian inscriptions begin listing Hindush among the empire's provinces, marking the empire's extension to its farthest eastern reach. To the west, Darius crossed into Europe, leading an expedition across the Bosphorus and up into Thrace, establishing Persian authority over the southern Balkans and making Macedon, that kingdom which would later destroy the Persian Empire, into a Persian vassal state. From the European side of the Bosphorus, Darius looked north toward the vast Scythian steppes and decided to add these nomadic peoples to his empire. It was a disastrous decision, perhaps the only major strategic blunder of his reign. The Scythians were horse nomads who refused to fight set-piece battles where Persian superiority in organized warfare could prevail. Instead, they retreated endlessly, drawing Darius's army deeper into the steppes. burning crops and poisoning wells, appearing only to harass Persian columns with mounted archers before vanishing back into the grasslands. The Persians marched and marched, finding nothing to conquer, no cities to besiege, no army to defeat. Supply lines stretched impossibly thin. The army began to starve. Darius was forced to retreat, his first significant military failure. The Scythian campaign demonstrated the limits of imperial expansion. Some peoples, some terrains, simply could not be conquered by conventional means. The steppes would remain beyond effective Persian control, a perpetual frontier where nomadic raiders could strike and then disappear into vastness that swallowed armies. But one frontier obsessed Darius more than any other: Greece. Those fractious city-states on the western edge of his empire, culturally sophisticated but politically divided, wealthy from trade but militarily vulnerable, they represented both opportunity and threat. Some Greek cities in Ionia, on the Aegean coast of Asia Minor, were already Persian subjects, but they chafed under Persian rule, longing for the freedom they had lost when Cyrus conquered Lydia. In 499 before the Common Era, these Ionian Greeks revolted, and Athens, the most powerful city-state in mainland Greece, sent ships to support them. The revolt was crushed. Persian military superiority ensured that outcome, but the involvement of Athens could not be ignored. Darius saw it as intolerable interference, a challenge to Persian authority that required response. In 490 before the Common Era, Darius sent a punitive expedition across the Aegean. The fleet sailed from island to island, subduing resistance until it reached mainland Greece and landed at Marathon, a plain northeast of Athens. There, on that flat ground perfect for cavalry action, Persian forces met an Athenian army. What happened next shocked the ancient world. The Athenians, heavily outnumbered, charged directly at the Persian centre, a tactic that seemed like madness infantry running into arrows and cavalry. But the Greeks' heavy bronze armour protected them from Persian arrows, and their close-packed phalanx formation created an irresistible momentum. The Persian centre buckled, then broke. The wings tried to envelop the Greeks, but found themselves outmanoeuvred. The battle became a rout. Persian forces retreated to their ships, having suffered thousands of casualties against a few hundred Greek dead. Marathon was not militarily decisive. Persia remained vastly more powerful than any Greek city-state, but psychologically it changed everything. The Greeks discovered that Persians could be beaten, that the enormous imperial army was not invincible. They learned that courage and tactical innovation could overcome numerical superiority. And Darius learned that Greece would not be easily subdued, that these Western barbarians possessed a martial spirit and tactical sophistication that would make conquest costly. Darius began preparing for a larger expedition, one that would bring overwhelming force against Greece and settle the matter definitively. But in 486 before the Common Era, before he could launch this invasion, Darius died. He was approximately 64 years old and had ruled for 36 years, transforming the Persian Empire from a conquest-based realm held together by force and personality into an organized state with functioning administrative systems, reliable communications, and institutional continuity. His tomb at Nakshi Rustam, carved into a cliff face near Persepolis, shows him standing before a fire altar, supported by representatives of all the empire's peoples. The inscription reads, "Darius the Great King, King of Kings, King of countries containing all kinds of men, King in this great earth far and wide." It is not boastful, it is simply accurate. Darius had created something unprecedented, an empire that functioned as a system rather than as an extension of one man's will. He left to his son Xerxes an empire at the height of its power, wealthy, organized, confident, and hungry to settle the Greek question. That hunger would lead to the greatest military expedition the ancient world had yet seen, to battles whose names echo through history, and to a confrontation that would ultimately reveal the limits of Persian power. But in 486 before the Common Era, as Darius was laid to rest and Xerxes inherited the throne, none of that was yet clear. The Persian Empire stood as the greatest concentration of power, wealth, and organizational sophistication the world had ever known. It had been perfected, and its perfection seemed eternal. The question was whether perfection could survive the test of ambition, whether the system Darius built could withstand the strain of unlimited expansion, whether the next generation of kings would prove worthy of their inheritance. The answer lay ahead, in the narrow pass at Thermopylae, in the waters of Salamis Bay, on the plains of Plataea. The answer lay in the collision between Persian imperial might and Greek determination to remain free. The empire was perfected. Now it would face its greatest test. There are moments in history when the course of civilization balances on a knife's edge, when the outcome of a single conflict reverberates through centuries. The year 480 before the Common Era is such a moment. Xerxes, son of Darius, inheritor of the greatest empire the world has ever known, stands at the edge of his realm, looking west toward Greece, and he has decided that the time has come to finish what his father began. Xerxes is perhaps 36 years old when he ascends the throne, a man raised in the splendor of Persepolis, educated in the complexities of imperial governance, trained in the arts of war and statecraft. He is not Cyrus, no one is, but he is capable, ambitious, and acutely aware of his father's unfinished business. Marathon remains an open wound in Persian pride, an insult that demands response. Athens must be punished for its interference in the Ionian revolt, for its audacity in defeating a Persian army, for its continued existence as a beacon of resistance to Persian authority. But Xerxes understands that another limited expedition, like the one that failed at Marathon, will not suffice. If Greece is to be conquered, if Athens is to be brought to heel, if Persian authority is to be established over the Aegean world, then overwhelming force must be applied. Not a raid, not a punitive expedition, but a full imperial invasion that will settle the matter once and for all. And so Xerxes begins to assemble the largest military force ever gathered under one command. For 4 years, from 484 to 480 before the Common Era, preparations consume the empire's resources and attention. From every satrapy, contingents are summoned: Persian and Median cavalry, Babylonian infantry, Egyptian marines, Phoenician sailors, Bactrian horse archers, Indian war elephants, Ethiopian spearmen. Herodotus, our primary source for these events and admittedly prone to exaggeration, claims that the army numbered 1,700,000 men, with an additional 300,000 in the navy and support services. Modern historians consider these numbers impossible logistically. Such a force could not be supplied, could not march in coordinated fashion, would literally consume every resource along its path. More realistic estimates place the invasion force at perhaps 150 to 250,000 soldiers, still enormous by ancient standards, still the largest unified army yet assembled. When this force marches, the earth trembles. When it camps, it empties rivers. When it consumes supplies, entire regions are stripped bare. But moving such an army from Asia into Europe presents unprecedented logistical challenges. The narrow strait called the Hellespont, now the Dardanelles, separates Asia Minor from Thrace, and though the strait is less than a mile wide at its narrowest point, no bridge has ever spanned it. Xerxes orders his engineers to accomplish the impossible. They construct 2 parallel bridges using hundreds of ships, triremes and pentaconters, anchored side by side across the strait, their decks planked over to create a roadway. Cables of flax and papyrus hold the ships in position against current and tide. When the first bridges are destroyed by a storm, Xerxes, in a display of the autocratic temper that will characterize his reign, orders, the Hellespont itself to be whipped 300 times and branded with hot irons, as if punishing the sea for its disobedience. The engineers who failed are executed. New engineers construct sturdier bridges, and this time they hold. The army also faces the challenge of Mount Athos, a rocky peninsula jutting into the Aegean where storms have wrecked previous Persian fleets. Rather than risk the treacherous waters, Xerxes orders a canal dug through the narrowest part of the peninsula, a project requiring years of labor and the work of thousands. When completed, the canal is wide enough for 2 triremes to pass side by side, a marvel of engineering that allows the fleet to bypass the dangerous cape entirely. These projects, the bridges, the canal, the accumulated supplies stockpiled at stations along the invasion route demonstrate Persian organizational capacity at its peak. This is not merely an army marching to war, it is a civilization projecting power across a continent, bending geography itself to imperial will. In the spring of 480, before the Common Era, the invasion begins. Picture the scene. At Sardis, the army assembles in a review that takes days to complete. Xerxes sits on a marble throne erected on a hill, watching as contingent after contingent parades past warriors in the armor and dress of dozens of nations, speaking scores of languages, united only by service to the King of Kings. The diversity is staggering. Immortals in their distinctive robes, Scythian horse archers, Arabian camel riders, Libyan javelin throwers, each group maintaining its traditional fighting style, each contributing its particular expertise to the overwhelming whole. The army marches north and west, following the coast through Thrace. Supply depots have been established in advance, but even so, feeding this multitude strains every resource. Herodotus tells us that one Thracian chieftain, forced to provide a banquet for Xerxes and his staff, spent the equivalent of 400 talents on a single meal, and afterward thanked the gods that Xerxes only ate once per day. Whether literally true or not, the story captures the impossible burden of supporting such a force. When the army reaches the Hellespont, Xerxes performs a ceremony that reveals much about Persian imperial ideology. He pours libations into the sea, prays to the sun, and casts a golden bowl and a Persian sword into the waters as offerings. Then the crossing begins. For 7 days and 7 nights, the army marches across the bridges, a continuous stream of humanity and animals and equipment flowing from Asia into Europe. Xerxes watches it all, and according to Herodotus, he weeps when asked why. He explains that he is contemplating the brevity of human life, reflecting that of all these hundreds of thousands of men, not one will be alive in 100 years. It is a moment of philosophical melancholy that reminds us that even conquering kings are mortal. Even the most powerful men are subject to time's tyranny. But melancholy does not stop the invasion. The army advances into Greece, and panic spreads before it like a wave. Many Greek city-states, calculating that resistance is futile, offer earth and water, the traditional symbols of submission, and join the Persian side. But Athens and Sparta, the 2 most powerful city-states, refuse. They understand that submission means the end of their freedom, their political systems, their way of life. They choose to fight, no matter how long the odds. The Greeks establish a defensive position at Thermopylae, a narrow coastal pass where the mountains meet the sea, where massive numbers count for little because the battlefield narrows to a space perhaps 50 feet wide. If the Persians can be held here, if their advance can be delayed long enough for Greek forces to mobilize fully, perhaps the impossible might become possible. The Greek force at Thermopylae numbers perhaps 7,000 men, led by King Leonidas of Sparta and his personal guard of 300 Spartans, the elite warriors of the most militaristic society in the ancient world. For 3 days, they hold the pass against wave after wave of Persian attacks. The Immortals, the elite Persian infantry, hurl themselves at the Greek phalanx and are thrown back with terrible casualties. The narrow space negates Persian numerical superiority, and Greek heavy infantry, fighting in close formation with long spears and massive shields, proves devastatingly effective in this confined space. Xerxes watches from a distance, and according to the sources, he leaps from his throne 3 times in anxiety, unable to believe that so few men can withstand his entire army. But hold they do, and the invasion stalls at Thermopylae, unable to force the pass, unable to advance. Then betrayal intervenes. A local Greek named Ephialtes, hoping for Persian gold, reveals a mountain path that bypasses the pass, allowing Persian forces to circle behind the Greek position. When Leonidas learns that he is about to be surrounded, he dismisses most of the Greek force, saving them to fight another day. But he and his 300 Spartans remain, along with some Thespian and Theban contingents, determined to hold the pass long enough for the rest of the army to escape. The final stand at Thermopylae has become the stuff of legend. Surrounded, hopelessly outnumbered, the Spartans fight with the fury of men who know they are already dead. When their spears break, they fight with swords. When their swords break, they fight with daggers. When their weapons are gone, they fight with hands and teeth. By the end of the day, every Greek defender is dead, and the Persians have paid for their victory with thousands of casualties. Xerxes, enraged by the resistance, orders Leonidas's body found, and his head displayed on a spike, a dishonoring treatment contrary to Persian custom, suggesting the depth of his fury. But the Spartans have achieved their objective. The delay at Thermopylae has given Athens time to evacuate its population to the island of Salamis, time for the Greek fleet to assemble, time to plan the next stage of resistance. The Persian army advances into central Greece, unopposed now, and reaches Athens itself. The city is nearly empty, its citizens evacuated, only a few defenders remaining on the Acropolis, the fortified height that dominates the city. Persian forces besiege the Acropolis, and after brief resistance, it falls. Athens is systematically destroyed. Buildings are burned, temples razed, monuments smashed. It is comprehensive devastation, revenge for Marathon, punishment for resistance. The greatest city in Greece, the cultural and intellectual center of Hellenic civilization, is reduced to smoking ruins. Xerxes has achieved his primary objective. Athens has been destroyed, its people scattered, its power broken. By all conventional measures of ancient warfare, the campaign is a success. But the war is not over, because the Athenian fleet remains intact, sheltered in the waters off Salamis, and as long as that fleet exists, as long as Greek naval power can challenge Persian control of the sea, the conquest remains incomplete. Xerxes faces a crucial decision. Should he pursue the Prospries, fleeing Greeks and force a naval battle, or consolidate his gains and wait out the Greek resistance? His advisors are divided. The Persian fleet outnumbers the Greek fleet, perhaps 3 to 1, 600 to 700 ships against perhaps 350 Greek vessels. Naval superiority should ensure victory, but others counsel caution, pointing out that the Persian fleet, drawn from Phoenician, Egyptian, and Ionian contingents, has never fought together as a coordinated force, while the Greek fleet, dominated by Athenian ships, is unified in command and defending its homeland waters. Xerxes chooses battle. He is confident in his numbers, eager to finish the campaign before autumn storms make naval operations impossible, and perhaps influenced by his mistress, Artemisia, queen of Halicarnassus, who commands 5 ships in the Persian fleet and whose counsel Xerxes values. Ironically, Artemisia actually advises against immediate battle, suggesting that time and supply shortages will force Greek surrender without risking the fleet, but her caution is overruled by other commanders eager for glory. The battle is set for the Straits of Salamis, narrow waters between the island and the mainland. The Greeks have chosen this battlefield carefully in confined waters. Persian numerical superiority will be reduced, and heavier Greek triremes will have advantages in ramming and close-quarters fighting. Xerxes has a golden throne erected on a hill overlooking the straits, where he can watch his fleet destroy Greek naval power. Secretaries stand ready to record the names of captains who distinguish themselves in the coming victory. It is meant to be a spectacle, a display of overwhelming power, the final act of conquest that will bring Greece to its knees. At dawn, the fleets engage. The Persian ships enter the straits in lines, confident in their superiority, moving to overwhelm the Greek position through sheer numbers. But the straits are narrower than they appear, and as Persian ships crowd into the confined space, their formation begins to break down. Ships collide with each other, oars tangle, the careful battle lines degenerate into chaos. The Greek fleet, waiting in disciplined formation, strikes like a hammer. Their heavier triremes ram Persian ships, their bronze-sheathed bows smashing through planking, their marines boarding damaged vessels to finish off crews. The confined waters that hamper the Persians work to Greek advantage. There is no room to maneuver, no space to use superior numbers, only brutal close-quarters fighting where Greek infantry training and heavier ships prove decisive. From his throne, Xerxes watches disaster unfold. His fleet is not merely defeated but destroyed. Ships sink or flee, leaving the water choked with wreckage and bodies. The Phoenician squadron, supposedly the best in the Persian navy, is shattered. Egyptian ships fare little better. Only Artemisia distinguishes herself, fighting skillfully, and in one infamous moment ramming and sinking a Persian allied ship to escape pursuing Greeks, an act of desperate pragmatism that somehow increases Xerxes' respect for her, even as his fleet disintegrates around her. By day's end, the Persian navy has lost perhaps 200 ships against minimal Greek casualties. More important than the numbers is the strategic situation. Persian naval supremacy is broken. Control of the Aegean is contested. The supply lines that support the massive Persian army in Greece are vulnerable. Xerxes can no longer assume automatic dominance of the sea. The implications are immediate and devastating. Without secure sea communications, the Persian army in Greece cannot be reliably supplied. Without naval support, coastal operations are impossible. Without control of the Aegean islands, Persian forces are vulnerable to raids and disruption. The entire strategic logic of the invasion has been undermined in a single day of battle. Xerxes withdraws. Not immediately, not in panic, but in a strategic retreat that acknowledges changed circumstances. He takes the bulk of the army back to Asia, leaving his general Mardonius with perhaps 80,000 men to winter in Thessaly and complete the conquest in the following year. Xerxes himself returns to Persia. His personal involvement in the campaign ended, his great invasion stalled but not yet defeated. Through the winter of 480 to 479 before the Common Era, Mardonius maintains Persian presence in Greece, using diplomacy and military pressure to try to split the Greek alliance. He offers Athens remarkably generous terms: restoration of the city, autonomy within the Persian Empire, alliance rather than subjugation. It is a clever strategy, for if Athens can be detached from Sparta, Greek resistance will collapse. But the Athenians refuse, choosing uncertain freedom over guaranteed security. In the spring of 479 before the Common Era, the final confrontation comes at Plataea, a plain in Boeotia where Greek and Persian armies meet in relatively open terrain. The Greek force, unified under Spartan command, numbers perhaps 40,000 to 50,000 hoplites plus light troops. Mardonius commands a similar-sized force of Persians, Medes, and Greek allies. The battle lasts for days, with neither side able to gain decisive advantage. The Persians harass Greek supply lines with cavalry raids. The Greeks maintain their defensive positions, refusing to be drawn into unfavorable terrain. Mardonius, growing impatient, finally orders a general assault. It is a catastrophic mistake. The Spartans, fighting in the close-packed phalanx formation that has made them legendary, prove unstoppable. Their discipline holds even under intense arrow fire. Their spears and shields create an irresistible momentum. The Persian center, despite fighting bravely, cannot withstand the Spartan advance. Mardonius himself falls in the fighting, killed by a Spartan warrior, and his death breaks Persian morale. The army disintegrates, fleeing back toward their fortified camp. The Greeks storm the camp, slaughtering the defenders, capturing the Persian baggage train with its accumulated treasure. It is total defeat, the destruction of Persian military power in Greece. On the same day, according to tradition, though this may be symbolic synchronicity rather than literal fact, the Greek fleet destroys the remnants of the Persian navy at Mycale on the Ionian coast. Persian power in the Aegean is shattered completely. Xerxes receives the news in Susa. His great invasion, 4 years in preparation, involving resources drawn from across the empire, has ended in comprehensive failure. Athens has been burned, yes, but it will be rebuilt. Greek cities have been conquered, yes, but they will regain independence. The largest military expedition in history has achieved nothing permanent. Worse than nothing, it has demonstrated that Persian power, seemingly invincible, can be defeated by a small number of determined defenders fighting for their freedom. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. Before Salamis and Plataea, the expansion of Persian power seemed inevitable, unstoppable, divinely ordained. After these defeats, the aura of invincibility is shattered. Subject peoples who had accepted Persian rule as an unchangeable fact now see possibilities for resistance. Greek city-states that had submitted to Persia begin to rebel. The empire that seemed to be on the verge of controlling the entire known world has instead reached its maximum extent and begun the long, slow process of contraction. Xerxes lives for another 15 years after these disasters, but his reign never recovers its early momentum. He retreats into the ceremonial life of the palace, investing energy in building projects rather than military campaigns. He completes construction at Persepolis, adding the Gate of All, nations and the Hall of 100 Columns, magnificent structures that testify to continued imperial wealth even in strategic decline. But the court becomes poisonous. Intrigue flourishes in the absence of external focus. The harem, that institution where royal wives and concubines jockey for position and influence, becomes a center of conspiracy. Xerxes becomes entangled in romantic intrigues that undermine political stability. The sources tell lurid stories of his affair with his brother's wife, of his marriage to his own daughter to legitimize the relationship, of jealous queens and vengeful princes. How much is true and how much is Greek propaganda, designed to portray Persian court life as decadent and corrupt, is difficult to determine, but the pattern of internal decay is real enough. In 465 before the Common Era, Xerxes is assassinated in his bedchamber by Artabanus, the commander of the royal bodyguard, in a conspiracy that may have involved the crown prince Darius. Artabanus then murders Darius as well, hoping to seize the throne for himself, but another son, Artaxerxes, rallies support and kills Artabanus in turn. The succession crisis is brief but violent, a preview of the factional struggles that will increasingly characterize Persian royal politics. When we assess Xerxes' reign, we must balance achievement against failure. He inherited the greatest empire the world had ever known, and he left it still the greatest empire in existence. The Greek disasters, traumatic as they were, did not destroy Persian power. The empire remained dominant in the Near East, controlled vast resources, commanded millions of subjects. Egypt stayed subdued, Babylon remained loyal, the eastern provinces contributed their tribute. By any objective measure, Persia was still a superpower. But something intangible had been lost. The sense of inevitable expansion, the confidence that Persian arms could conquer any foe, the belief that the empire represented an irresistible historical force. These psychological assets, perhaps more valuable than armies or treasure, were damaged beyond repair. The empire would endure for another century and a half, would even enjoy periods of revival and renewed strength, but it would never again attempt conquest on the scale that Xerxes envisioned. Consider what might have been if the bridges had held at Thermopylae for just one more day, if the Persian fleet had avoided battle at Salamis and simply blockaded the Greeks into submission, if Mardonius had waited at Plataea for Greek unity to fracture rather than forcing battle. Any of these outcomes might have changed history, might have brought Greece under Persian rule, might have altered the entire development of Western civilization. But history is made of what happened, not what might have happened. Thermopylae became a legend of heroic resistance. Salamis demonstrated that courage and strategy could overcome numerical odds. Plataea proved that heavy infantry and disciplined formation could defeat the diverse forces of empire. These victories did not destroy Persia, but they preserved Greek independence long enough for Athens to create democracy, for Greek philosophy and science to flourish, for Hellenic culture to develop the intellectual tools that would eventually spread across the world. The Persian Empire, magnificent in its administration, sophisticated in its cultural tolerance, impressive in its engineering and organizational achievements, had nevertheless failed at the supreme test of arms against a determined foe. It would remain wealthy, still powerful, still capable of intimidating its neighbors. But the tide had turned. The age of Persian expansion was over. What lay ahead was the long twilight over a century of imperial decline, punctuated by brief revivals, until eventually a young Macedonian king would finish what the Greeks at Salamis and Plataea had begun. But we are not there yet. The empire endures, changed but unbroken, wealthy but chastened, powerful but no longer invincible. Its story continues through generations of kings who will struggle to maintain what Cyrus built and Darius perfected, who will face endless rebellions and conspiracies, who will watch as the foundations slowly erode beneath the magnificent facade. The clash of titans has concluded. Both sides claimed victory, the Greeks their freedom, the Persians their continued dominance of the Near East. Both were right, and both were wrong. The real victor was time itself, which continued its patient work of transformation, showing that even the mightiest empires rise, peak, and begin their long descent toward twilight. There is something melancholy about empires in decline. They do not fall suddenly, like a tree struck by lightning. Instead, they fade gradually, like a sunset that takes hours to complete, where brilliance gives way to beauty, and beauty to shadow, and shadow finally to darkness. The Persian Empire after Xerxes enters such a twilight, still vast, still wealthy, still the dominant power in the Near East, but no longer expanding, no longer invincible, no longer confident that history bends inevitably toward Persian supremacy. Artaxerxes I, who emerges victorious from the succession crisis that follows his father's assassination, inherits an empire that requires careful management rather than bold conquest. He is perhaps 20 years old when he secures the throne in 465 before the Common Era, and he will reign for 40 years, a period not of dramatic transformation but of patient maintenance, of problems managed rather than solved, of challenges endured rather than overcome. The Greeks remain a persistent irritant. The Delian League, formed originally as a defensive alliance against Persia, transforms under Athenian leadership into something resembling an Athenian empire. Greek cities along the Ionian coast, nominally Persian subjects, maintain secret contacts with Athens and Sparta. Periodic conflicts flare raids, counter-raids, naval skirmishes that neither side can decisively win. It is exhausting, expensive, and ultimately futile for both sides. Artaxerxes eventually negotiates what becomes known as the Peace of Callias around 449 before the Common Era, though its historical authenticity is debated. The terms acknowledge reality. Persia gives up claims to the Aegean Islands and agrees not to send warships into the Aegean Sea, while the Greeks acknowledge Persian control of the Anatolian coast and agree not to attack Persian territories. It is a compromise born of mutual exhaustion, a recognition that neither side can destroy the other, that coexistence is preferable to endless conflict. This peace, whether formal or simply understood, reveals the new reality of Persian power. The empire that once dreamed of conquering Greece now settles for containing it. The difference between Xerxes' ambitions and Artaxerxes' achievements could not be clearer. Yet the peace brings benefits, trade flows increase, resources can be redirected from military expenditure to internal development. The constant drain of war-making can be reduced if not eliminated. But if Greece represents frustration, Egypt represents outright humiliation. In 464 before the Common Era, just 1 year into Artaxerxes' reign, Egypt revolts under a Libyan prince named Inaros. The rebellion succeeds shockingly quickly. The Persian satrap is killed, the garrison overwhelmed, Egyptian independence proclaimed. Athens, never one to miss an opportunity to weaken Persia, sends a fleet of 200 ships to support the revolt. Artaxerxes responds with a massive expeditionary force. For 6 years, war ravages the Nile Delta. Persian armies besiege Memphis, the ancient capital. Greek ships control waterways. Egyptian forces, fighting for their homeland, resist with the fury of people who have been conquered too many times. The war consumes resources at an appalling rate. Men, ships, treasure, all poured into this struggle for control of the world's oldest civilization. Eventually, Persian numerical superiority prevails. The Persian general Megabyzus, whose name alone captures the exotic quality these Eastern monarchies held for Greek imagination, crushes the rebellion. Inaros is captured and eventually executed. The Athenian fleet is destroyed, with only a handful of ships escaping back to Greece. Egypt is reconquered, garrisoned even more heavily than before. Its tribute increased to pay for the cost of its own subjugation. But the victory feels hollow. 6 years of warfare, enormous casualties, the near-total destruction of one of the empire's most valuable provinces, all to restore a status quo that will prove temporary. Egypt will rebel again and again, and each time the cost of reconquest will be higher. The Egyptians have learned something crucial. Persian power, while still formidable, can be resisted, and resistance, even when ultimately unsuccessful, extracts a price that makes empire less profitable. The reign of Artaxerxes reveals another troubling pattern: the increasing independence of satraps. These provincial governors, appointed by the king to administer regions larger than most kingdoms, begin to behave like semi-independent rulers. They maintain personal armies, conduct their own diplomatic relations, build palatial residences that rival those in Persia itself. Megabyzus, fresh from his Egyptian triumph, actually revolts against Artaxerxes over a personal grievance. The king had promised that Inaros would not be executed, but then allowed the queen mother to insist on the rebel leader's death. Megabyzus' revolt is eventually resolved through negotiation rather than force. He is too powerful to be easily suppressed, and the empire cannot afford another prolonged civil war. But the precedent is ominous. If even successful, loyal, generals can rebel and negotiate their way back to favor, what does that say about royal authority? The satrap system that Darius designed as a tool of centralized control is becoming a framework for decentralization, creating regional power bases that acknowledge the king's supremacy more as a formality than as a practical reality. The court, meanwhile, becomes increasingly insular and ritualized. The Persian kings no longer lead armies personally, no longer risk their lives in battle as Cyrus did, as Darius did, as even Xerxes did briefly. They govern from Persepolis or Susa or Ecbatana, receiving reports filtered through layers of bureaucracy, making decisions based on information that may be months out of date. The distance between the king and his subjects grows, both literally and metaphorically. Royal succession becomes poisonous. Unlike many ancient monarchies, where primogeniture, the rule that the eldest son inherits, provides clear succession, Persian custom allows any legitimate son to potentially become king. This creates a system where royal princes plot against each other, where mothers and concubines scheme on behalf of their children, where succession frequently involves assassination, civil war, or both. The harem, which in Cyrus's time was a private matter, becomes a political institution where alliances are formed and futures are decided. When Artaxerxes dies in 424 before the Common Era, he leaves the throne to his son Xerxes II, who rules for 45 days before being murdered by his half-brother Sogdianus, who rules for 6 months before being overthrown by another half-brother, Darius II. This succession crisis is brief compared to what will come later, but it establishes a pattern of fratricidal violence that will plague the empire for generations. Darius II, called Darius Nothus, the bastard, because his mother was a Babylonian concubine rather than a Persian noblewoman, rules for 19 years from 423 to 405 before the Common Era. His reign is characterized by continued conflict with Greece, continued troubles with Egypt, and continued problems with powerful satraps who act more like allied kings than subordinate governors. But Darius Nothus is clever enough to exploit Greek weaknesses. The Peloponnesian War, that devastating conflict between Athens and Sparta that consumes Greece from 431 to 404 before the Common Era, provides Persia with opportunity. Persian gold flows to Sparta, helping to build the fleet that will eventually defeat Athens. Persian diplomats play the Greek city-states against each other with skill. Persia cannot conquer Greece militarily, but it can prevent Greece from threatening Persian interests, can maintain a balance of power that serves imperial goals. When Athens finally surrenders to Sparta in 404 before the Common Era, much of the credit belongs to Persian financial support. The irony is rich. The Spartans, who died heroically at Thermopylae resisting Persian conquest, now serve as Persian proxies in maintaining Greek division. The Greeks, who defeated Xerxes through unity, now tear themselves apart while Persia watches and profits. It is not the triumph Xerxes dreamed of, but it achieves the essential objective. Greece remains too divided and exhausted to threaten Persian interests. Yet even as Persia successfully manages the Greek problem, new troubles emerge elsewhere. Satraps in Asia Minor become virtually independent, conducting their own foreign policies, fighting private wars against each other. Egypt simmers with resentment, requiring constant military presence to prevent rebellion. The eastern provinces, always the most difficult to control, drift away from effective central authority. When Darius II dies in 405 before the Common Era, he leaves the throne to his eldest son, Artaxerxes II. But his younger son, also named Cyrus, later called Cyrus the Younger, believes himself better qualified to rule and has the support of his mother, the formidable queen Parysatis. The stage is set for civil war. Cyrus the Younger is everything a Persian prince should be: brave, charismatic, energetic, popular with the army. He governs satrapies in Asia Minor with ability and builds a substantial power base. When Artaxerxes ascends the throne, Cyrus begins planning rebellion. He recruits a mercenary force of 10,000 Greek hoplites, the finest heavy infantry available, and combines them with Persian forces loyal to him personally. In 401 before the Common Era, he marches from Asia Minor toward Babylon, claiming he is suppressing a rebellion but actually aiming for the throne itself. Artaxerxes assembles his forces and meets Cyrus at Cunaxa, near Babylon, in September of 401 before the Common Era. The battle reveals both the strength and weakness of the Persian military system. The Greek mercenaries, commanded by a young Athenian named Xenophon, who will later write a famous account of the campaign, smash through everything in their path. The Persian troops opposing them break and flee. Tactically, Cyrus's forces are winning, but Cyrus himself, eager for glory and convinced that killing his brother will end the battle immediately, leads a cavalry charge directly at Artaxerxes' position. He breaks through the royal bodyguard, wounds Artaxerxes personally according to some sources, and is on the verge of victory when he is killed, struck down in the melee around the king. With Cyrus dead, his cause dies with him. His Persian forces surrender or flee. The Greeks find themselves victorious on the battlefield but stranded deep in hostile territory with their employer dead and no obvious way home. What follows is one of history's great military adventures, the March of the 10,000, the Anabasis, that Xenophon immortalizes in his writing. The Greek mercenaries, betrayed by Persian promises of safe conduct when their commanders are invited to negotiate and then murdered, fight their way north toward the Black Sea and safety. Through hostile territories, across rivers and mountains, pursued by Persian forces, they march for 5 months until finally reaching the Greek colonies on the Black Sea coast. When they crest a final ridge and see the sea, their cry, Thalata, Thalata, meaning the sea, expresses relief that has echoed through literature for millennia. The survival of the 10,000 is militarily insignificant. 10,000 soldiers, even highly skilled ones, do not determine the fate of empires, but the psychological impact is profound. These Greeks marched through the heart of the Persian Empire, defeated every force sent against them, and escaped to tell the tale. The lesson is clear. Persian power in its heartland is not as formidable as it appears. A relatively small disciplined force can operate with near impunity in regions supposedly under firm imperial control. A young Macedonian prince named Philip, living as a hostage in Thebes at this time, hears tales of the Anabasis and absorbs its lessons. His son Alexander will remember them, but that is a story for later. Artaxerxes II, having survived his brother's rebellion, rules for 46 years, the longest reign in Achaemenid history. It is not a reign of glory but of endurance. He faces endless rebellions. Satraps in Asia Minor revolt repeatedly, requiring expensive military expeditions to suppress. Egypt breaks free again in approximately 380 before the Common Era and will remain independent for decades, a humiliating loss that successive kings will attempt and fail to reverse. The king's personal life becomes the stuff of Greek gossip and Persian scandal. His mother Parysatis, who had supported Cyrus's rebellion, remains influential and uses her position to torment Artaxerxes' wife Statira, who had opposed Cyrus. The sources tell of poisonings, of conspiracies, of a court consumed by personal vendettas rather than focused on imperial governance. How much is true and how much is sensationalized propaganda is impossible to determine, but the pattern of internal dysfunction is undeniable. Artaxerxes attempts to compensate for military weakness through diplomacy, and here he achieves some success. The king's peace of 387, before the Common Era, also called the Peace of Antalcidas, after the Spartan diplomat who negotiates it, represents a diplomatic triumph. The Greek city-states, exhausted by decades of warfare, acknowledge Persian control over the Greek cities of Asia Minor in exchange for Persian recognition of mainland Greek independence. Persia achieves diplomatically what it could never achieve militarily, Greek acknowledgement of Persian dominance in the region, but it is a hollow triumph. The cities, returned to Persian control, had long since ceased to function as genuine Persian subjects. The peace merely formalizes a reality where Persia influences Greek politics through golden diplomacy rather than through direct control. and the precedent is troubling. The empire increasingly relies on paying others to fight its battles, on diplomatic maneuvering rather than military might, on managing decline rather than driving expansion. By the time Artaxerxes dies in 358 before the Common Era, aged approximately 94, an extraordinary lifespan for the ancient world, the empire he leaves is radically different from the one Darius perfected. It is still vast, still the largest political entity in the known world, still capable of fielding enormous armies and collecting vast revenues. But the vitality is gone. The provinces are held not by loyalty or even fear, but by inertia, by the absence of alternatives, by the calculation that rebellion is more trouble than it is worth. His successor, Artaxerxes III, recognizes that decline must be reversed, that the empire requires restoration through strength. He is ruthless in a way his predecessors were not, willing to use terror and mass execution to impose discipline. When he ascends the throne, he immediately orders the execution of all his male relatives who might potentially challenge him, a massacre that secures his position, but demonstrates how far the dynasty has fallen from Cyrus's ideals of family loyalty and noble honor. Artaxerxes III campaigns aggressively to restore imperial authority. Rebellious satraps are crushed without mercy. Phoenician cities that revolt are besieged and destroyed, their populations enslaved, and in 343 before the Common Era, he finally accomplishes what his predecessors could not, the reconquest of Egypt. The campaign is brutal, conducted with deliberate cruelty, designed to terrorize Egypt into submission. Persian forces destroy temples, kill sacred animals, install a garrison strong enough to prevent future rebellion. The reconquest of Egypt represents the last gasp of Persian military vitality. For a brief moment, it seems the empire might reverse its decline, might recover the strength it had under Darius and Xerxes. The satrapal revolts are suppressed. Egypt is back in the fold. Persian authority is re-established across the empire. Artaxerxes has demonstrated that the empire can still project overwhelming force when necessary, but the restoration is fragile, built on terror rather than consent, maintained by force rather than accepted as legitimate, and Artaxerxes himself becomes the victim of the court intrigues he had tried to eliminate through massacre. In 338 before the Common Era, he is poisoned by his physician Bagoas, a eunuch who wields enormous power in the palace. Bagoas then controls the succession, placing Artaxerxes' youngest son Arses on the throne as a puppet. When Arses attempts to assert independence, Bagoas poisons him too, along with his children. The direct line of Artaxerxes is extinct, eliminated by a court official seeking power. Bagoas then places a distant Achaemenid relative named Darius on the throne, a man who has served as satrap of Armenia but has no expectation of ever becoming king. This new king, Darius III, will be the last Achaemenid ruler, though he does not know it yet. He is perhaps 45 years old, a capable administrator who has governed his province well, a man thrust into supreme power at a moment when that power is more ceremonial than real. His first act is to kill Bagoas, poisoning the poisoner, a fitting revenge that also demonstrates that Darius is no puppet. But in 336 before the Common Era, as Darius settles into his new role, events are unfolding in the west that will doom his reign before it truly begins. In Macedon, King Philip has spent 20 years building a military machine unlike anything the Greek world has seen. Professional soldiers rather than citizen militias, combined arms tactics integrating infantry, cavalry, and siege engines. A kingdom unified and mobilized for conquest. Philip's goal is to invade Persia, to liberate the Greek cities of Asia Minor, perhaps to seize the wealthy provinces of the Near East. In 336 before the Common Era, he sends an advance force into Asia Minor to prepare for the main invasion. But before he can follow with the full army, Philip is assassinated at his daughter's wedding, killed by his own bodyguard in a conspiracy whose true origins remain mysterious. Philip's son, Alexander, just 20 years old, inherits the throne and his father's invasion plans. Darius receives reports of this development, but is not overly concerned. Alexander is young, untested, ruling a kingdom barely larger than a Persian satrapy. He faces rebellions in Greece, challenges to his authority in Macedon itself. Surely he will be too busy consolidating his position to pose a serious threat to an empire that has endured for over 2 centuries. This assessment will prove to be the most catastrophic miscalculation in Persian history. The empire stands at the edge of darkness, though only a few far-sighted observers realize it. The administrative systems still function, the tribute still flows, the armies can still be assembled, but the rot is deep, the foundations undermined, the will to resist exhausted by generations of decline. The empire needs what it had under Cyrus and Darius' visionary leadership, strategic brilliance, the ability to inspire loyalty rather than merely command obedience. Instead, it has Darius III, a decent man in an impossible situation, facing a challenge unlike any the empire has confronted before. Not another great king leading a traditional empire, not a rebellion by subject peoples, not even a Greek coalition defending its independence. What is coming is something new in history. A mobile professional army, led by a military genius who has studied Persian weaknesses, who understands how to exploit the empire's ponderous size against itself, who has no interest in compromise or coexistence, but seeks total conquest. The long twilight is ending. The darkness is about to fall, swift and total, bringing down in a decade what had taken 2 centuries to build. The greatest empire the world had yet seen stands unaware on the precipice, looking east and north toward traditional threats, not seeing the storm gathering in the west that will sweep away everything the Achaemenids created. The sunset has become beautiful in its melancholy, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson and purple. But night is coming, inevitable and final, and when it arrives, it will come not gradually, but like a thunderbolt, changing everything in one terrible, transformative flash. In the spring of 334, before the Common Era, a young man stands on the European shore of the Hellespont, looking across the narrow strait toward Asia. He is 22 years old, king of Macedon for just 2 years, and he is about to cross into the Persian Empire with 35,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, a force that any rational calculation suggests is absurdly inadequate to challenge an empire of millions. His name is Alexander, and he carries within him a combination of gifts that appears perhaps once in a millennium: tactical genius, strategic vision, personal courage that inspires fanatic loyalty, and an ambition so vast that contemporaries will struggle to comprehend it. He has been trained by Aristotle, tutored in philosophy and science. He has studied his father Philip's revolutionary military tactics. He has read the Anabasis, Xenophon's account of the 10,000, and absorbed its lesson. Persian power can be defeated by disciplined troops led with skill and audacity. But Alexander possesses something beyond training and knowledge. He believes, with absolute conviction, that he is descended from heroes from Achilles through his mother's line, from Heracles through his father's. He believes that the gods favor his enterprise, that destiny has chosen him for greatness. This is not mere youthful arrogance, though it includes arrogance. It is a psychological certainty that communicates itself to his soldiers, making them believe that with Alexander leading them, the impossible becomes achievable. When Alexander crosses the Hellespont, he performs a theatrical gesture rich in symbolism. He personally steers his ship, and when it reaches the Asian shore, he hurls his spear into the ground, claiming all of Asia as spear-won territory. He then visits Troy, sacrificing at the supposed tomb of Achilles and taking ancient weapons from the temple to carry into battle. These are not empty ceremonies but declarations of purpose. Alexander has come not merely to raid or to liberate Greek cities, but to conquer, to claim the entire Persian Empire as his own. Darius III receives reports of this crossing with concern but not alarm. The Persian Empire has faced invasions before Xerxes invaded Greece with forces far larger than Alexander's, and even in decline, Persian resources dwarf those of Macedon. Darius dispatches satraps from Western Asia Minor with perhaps 40,000 troops to deal with this incursion before it can penetrate deeper into imperial territory. The two forces meet at the Granicus River in May of 334 before the Common Era. The Persians hold the far bank, their cavalry deployed in a strong defensive position with Greek mercenary infantry in reserve. It is a formidable arrangement. Alexander must cross the river under fire, his troops vulnerable as they wade through water and scramble up muddy banks, while Persian cavalry charges down upon them. Alexander chooses to attack immediately, despite his officers' advice to wait for better conditions. He understands that delay works against him. The longer he takes to achieve victory, the more time Persians have to assemble overwhelming forces. He personally leads the companion cavalry, the elite Macedonian horsemen who form the hammer of his tactical system, into the river and up the opposite bank. The fighting is brutal and personal. Alexander is struck on the helmet by a Persian nobleman, saved only when his friend Clytus kills the attacker. Macedonian infantry wade across and establish a foothold. The companion cavalry wheels and charges into the Persian flank. Within hours, the Persian cavalry breaks and flees. The Greek mercenaries, abandoned by their Persian employers, attempt to surrender. But Alexander, viewing them as traitors who fight for Persia against fellow Greeks, orders them massacred. 2,000 are killed. Another 2,000 are sent in chains to Macedonia to work in mines. It is a shocking victory and a warning. Alexander fights not as a king, directing operations from safety, but as a warrior in the front lines, sharing every danger with his troops. His tactical skill allows a smaller force to defeat a larger one through superior coordination and decisive action, and his ruthlessness toward those he considers traitors demonstrates that this invasion will be total war, without the conventions that typically limited ancient conflicts. The psychological impact of Granicus reverberates across the empire. The Western satrapies' military forces are shattered. Greek cities in Ionia, seeing which way the wind blows, open their gates to Alexander, welcoming him as a liberator from Persian rule. Persian garrisons withdraw or surrender. Within months, Alexander controls the entire Aegean coast of Asia Minor, depriving Persia of its western provinces and, more critically, its fleet bases. Darius now understands that this is not a raid to be contained, but an existential threat to be crushed. He begins assembling the imperial army, a process that takes time due to the empire's vast size. Contingents must be summoned from Egypt, from Babylon, from the eastern satrapies. Equipment must be gathered, supplies stockpiled, command structures established. The machinery of empire moves slowly but inevitably, preparing to bring overwhelming force against the Macedonian invader. Meanwhile, Alexander campaigns through southern Asia Minor, reducing cities that resist, accepting the surrender of those that submit. At Gordium he encounters the famous Gordian knot, an intricate binding of rope that, according to prophecy, whoever unties will rule Asia. Unable to find the knot's ends, Alexander simply draws his sword and cuts through it, a gesture that captures his approach to problems. Direct, violent, effective, unconcerned with traditional methods. In November of 333 before the Common Era, at Issus in the narrow coastal plain where mountains press close to the tree, Mediterranean, Alexander meets Darius himself in battle. The Persian army is enormous, perhaps 100,000 men against Alexander's 40,000. Darius commands personally, positioned in the center in his royal chariot, surrounded by his immortals and elite cavalry. This is the great king himself, the ruler of the world's largest empire, leading his forces against an upstart invader. The battle begins with Persian superiority. Their numbers allow them to overlap Macedonian flanks. Their archers pour fire into enemy formations. But Alexander identifies the crucial point: Darius himself. If the Persian king flees or falls, the entire army will lose cohesion. Alexander forms his companion cavalry into a wedge and charges directly at the Persian center, aiming for Darius's position. It is a desperate, audacious tactic that should not work. The companions must cross a river, penetrate defensive lines, and reach the king while under constant attack from all sides. But Macedonian training and Alexander's personal leadership create an irresistible momentum. The wedge drives deeper and deeper into Persian lines, killing Darius's charioteer, coming within spear thrust of the king himself, and Darius flees, whether from rational assessment that his death would doom the empire, or from simple panic. The great king turns his chariot and rides from the battlefield. His personal guard retreats with him. The center collapses as soldiers see their king fleeing. The wings, still fighting effectively, suddenly find themselves isolated and vulnerable. Within hours, the Persian army disintegrates into fleeing fragments, pursued by Macedonian cavalry that shows no mercy. Darius escapes, but he leaves everything behind: his treasury, his baggage train, his personal tent with its unimaginable luxury, and most catastrophically, his family. His mother, wife, and children fall into Alexander's hands, royal prisoners whose treatment will say much about the kind of conqueror Alexander intends to be. Alexander treats the captured royal women with scrupulous respect, providing them with appropriate quarters, maintaining their royal status, ensuring their safety and dignity. It is both chivalrous and strategic. Alexander is positioning himself not as a foreign destroyer, but as the rightful successor to Persian kingship, someone who honors Persian traditions even as he conquers Persian territories. After Issus, the Persian fleet, lacking bases and unable to challenge Macedonian control of the coast, begins to dissolve. Phoenician cities, seeing Persian power crumbling, defect to Alexander. Egypt, never reconciled to Persian rule, welcomes him as a liberator, but one city resists: Tyre, built on an island half a mile offshore, protected by the sea, confident in its impregnability. The siege of Tyre, lasting from January to July of 332 before the Common Era, demonstrates Alexander's terrible persistence. Unable to assault the island city by sea, he orders a causeway built a mole of stone and timber extending from the mainland to the island, wide enough for siege towers and battering rams. The Tyrians resist desperately, setting fire ships to destroy the causeway, mounting artillery on their walls to pound the approaching structures, fighting with the fury of people who know that surrender means death or slavery. But Alexander's engineers adapt to every countermeasure. His troops work without cease, and eventually the causeway reaches the island walls. Macedonian siege towers, taller than the city's fortifications, allow archers and artillery to suppress defensive fire. Battering rams breach the walls. Macedonian infantry pour through the gaps in overwhelming numbers. The fighting in Tyre's streets is a massacre: 8,000 Tyrians killed, 30,000 sold into slavery. Alexander has made his point. Resistance is futile and catastrophically expensive. With the coast secured, Alexander marches south into Egypt, arriving in late 332 before the Common Era. The Egyptians, who have endured Persian rule for barely a decade after their reconquest, welcome him with genuine enthusiasm. The Persian satrap surrenders without fighting. Alexander is proclaimed pharaoh in Memphis, offering sacrifices to Egyptian gods, presenting himself as the restorer of proper order rather than a foreign conqueror. He founds Alexandria at the Nile Delta, a city that will become one of the ancient world's great centers of learning and commerce. In the spring of 331 before the Common Era, Alexander marches northeast from Egypt toward Mesopotamia, seeking final confrontation with Darius. The Persian king has spent the year since Issus assembling the largest army. The Achaemenid Empire can muster perhaps 250,000 men, including cavalry from every corner of the empire, Scythian horse archers, Bactrian lancers, Indian war elephants, Greek mercenaries, chariots with scythe blades attached to their wheels designed to cut down infantry formations. Darius chooses the battlefield carefully. The plains near Gaugamela, north of ancient Nineveh, flat and open terrain perfect for his numerical superiority and his cavalry. He has the ground prepared, leveling obstacles, creating fields where his scythed chariots can reach maximum speed. This time, Darius is determined. There will be no escape, no tactical brilliance that can overcome such overwhelming odds. The armies meet on October 1st, 331 before the Common Era. From his position, Darius can see the Macedonian army, perhaps 50,000 men, hopelessly outnumbered, arrayed against forces 5 times their size. By every conventional calculation, Persian victory is certain. The empire's full military might, its accumulated resources, its diverse martial traditions, all are focused on this single objective, the destruction of Alexander's army. The battle begins with the scythed chariots charging the Macedonian lines. It should be devastating. These vehicles, with blades extending from their wheels, are designed to create panic and carnage, to break formations before the main assault. But Macedonian troops simply open gaps in their formation, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through before closing ranks again. Archers pick off the chariot drivers. The weapon that should have broken Alexander's army becomes a spectacular failure. Darius then commits his cavalry wings, attempting to envelop the smaller Macedonian force. Alexander has anticipated this. He extends his own flanks, refusing to be surrounded, using light infantry to harass Persian cavalry while maintaining formation integrity. The battle becomes a swirling cavalry engagement on both wings, while the infantry centers have yet to engage, and then Alexander sees his opportunity. The Persian left wing, pursuing Macedonian cavalry, has opened a gap in the line, not large but enough. Alexander personally leads the companion cavalry in a wedge formation, driving toward this gap, aiming once again directly at Darius's position in the center. It is the same tactic that worked at Issus, but it should not work twice. Darius knows it is coming, has prepared for it, has positioned his best troops to prevent exactly this maneuver. But the speed and precision of the Macedonian charge, the unstoppable momentum of thousands of horsemen in perfect formation, creates a kind of battlefield physics that overwhelms defenses. The wedge penetrates, drives deeper, reaches toward the king, and once again Darius flees. Perhaps he has learned nothing from Issus. Perhaps he believes his death will accomplish nothing while his survival allows the empire to continue resistance. Perhaps fear simply overwhelms duty. Whatever his reasoning, the result is catastrophic. The Persian center, seeing their king retreat, begins to waver. The wings, still fighting effectively, suddenly realize they, again, are isolated and at risk of being surrounded. The Persian army does not immediately collapse. There is still fierce fighting on the flanks. Macedonian casualties are substantial. Victory is not certain for hours. But eventually, inevitably, the forces without their king lose cohesion. Units begin to retreat independently. Retreat becomes rout. The greatest army the Persian Empire has ever assembled dissolves into fleeing fragments pursued by Macedonian cavalry that shows no mercy to the defeated. Darius escapes again, riding east toward the interior provinces, hoping to assemble another army to continue resistance from the empire's heartland. But his credibility as a military leader is destroyed. He has now fled from 2 battles, abandoned 2 armies to destruction. Whatever authority he retained after Issus is gone after Gaugamela. Alexander does not pursue Darius immediately. Instead, he turns south toward Babylon and the ancient city opens its gates without resistance. The Babylonian elite, never comfortable under Persian rule, welcomes Alexander as a liberator. He performs the traditional ceremonies, offers sacrifices to Marduk, presents himself as the restorer of proper Babylonian kingship. The city that was the jewel of Cyrus's conquests falls to Alexander without a single battle. From Babylon, Alexander marches to Susa, the administrative capital where Persian kings spent their winters. Again, the city surrenders without fighting, its treasuries opened to reveal wealth that staggers imagination. 50,000 talents of silver, the accumulated tribute of generations of imperial rule. Alexander has now captured enough Persian treasure to finance his army for years, to reward his soldiers with bonuses that make them wealthy, to fund further conquests without needing Macedonian resources. In January of 330 before the Common Era, Alexander approaches Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the empire, the city Darius built to proclaim Persian glory. He encounters minimal resistance. The Persian army is shattered, the satraps scattered or submissive, organized defense impossible. Persepolis opens its gates, and Alexander enters the city that represents everything the Achaemenid Empire created. For several months, Alexander occupies Persepolis peacefully, respecting its treasures and maintaining order. Then, in May, during a banquet, the palace complex catches fire. Whether this is accidental, deliberate policy, or drunken rage remains debated. Ancient sources suggest Alexander, intoxicated and urged on by Thais, an Athenian courtesan, orders the burning as revenge for Xerxes' destruction of Athens. Other accounts suggest a more calculated decision to symbolically end Persian imperial authority. Whatever the cause, Persepolis burns. The great audience halls, the columned porticos, the treasury buildings, the residential palaces, all are consumed by flames. The city that took generations to build is destroyed in a night. When morning comes and Alexander, sober or remorseful, surveys the damage, it is too late. The ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire is a smoking ruin. The destruction of Persepolis represents more than military victory. It is the symbolic annihilation of Persian imperial ideology. The city existed to proclaim the eternal supremacy of Persian kingship, to demonstrate that all nations properly acknowledge Persian sovereignty. Its destruction announces that this order has ended, that a new power has replaced the old, that 2 centuries of Achaemenid rule are finished. Darius, meanwhile, has fled to Ecbatana and then further east toward Bactria, still hoping to rally forces for continued resistance, but his authority has evaporated. Bessus, the satrap of Bactria and a distant relative of Darius, decides that the empire's best hope lies not in supporting a defeated king but in replacing him. In July of 330, before the Common Era, as Darius and his remaining followers flee through the deserts of eastern Iran, Bessus and other satraps place Darius under arrest. Alexander, pursuing relentlessly, drives his forces through brutal heat and waterless wastes, determined to capture Darius and legitimize his conquest by receiving the formal submission of the last Achaemenid king. But he arrives too late. When Macedonian advance forces finally catch up to Darius's party, they find the former great king lying in a wagon, mortally wounded, abandoned by his captors. According to tradition, a Macedonian soldier gives him water, and Darius dies, thanking Alexander for his kindness to the royal women captured at Issus. Whether this deathbed scene actually occurred or is a literary invention designed to provide dramatic closure, the essential fact remains. Darius III, last of the Achaemenid line, dies, not in battle defending his empire, but as a fugitive, murdered by his own nobles, abandoned by the very people he ruled. It is an ignominious end to a dynasty that began with Cyrus the Great's magnificent vision of empire. Alexander gives Darius a royal funeral at Persepolis, honoring him as a fallen king rather than a defeated enemy. It is both generous and politically astute. Alexander positions himself as Darius's legitimate successor, the rightful king of kings, rather than as a foreign conqueror. He adopts elements of Persian court dress, incorporates Persian nobles into his administration, marries Roxana, a Bactrian princess, symbolically uniting Macedonian and Persian ruling classes. But the conquest is not yet complete. Bessus has proclaimed himself great king and fled to Bactria, claiming to continue Achaemenid resistance. It takes Alexander another 3 years of brutal campaigning through Afghanistan and Central Asia to hunt down and capture Bessus, who is eventually tortured and executed. The eastern satrapies, never fully integrated into the empire even under Persian rule, resist fiercely. Alexander's casualties mount. His army grows weary of endless campaigns in harsh terrain against enemies who refuse conventional battle. By 327 before the Common Era, Alexander has pushed beyond the empire's traditional boundaries, crossing into India, still pursuing his dream of reaching the edge of the world. But at the Hyphasis River, his exhausted troops finally refuse to march further. Alexander, weeping with frustration, accepts their decision and turns back. He has conquered the Persian Empire, yes, but he has not conquered the world, and this unfulfilled ambition will haunt his final years. The Achaemenid Empire, which had endured for 220 years, which had stretched from Egypt to India, which had created administrative systems and cultural achievements that influenced civilizations for millennia, had fallen in less than a decade. The speed of the collapse is breathtaking from Granicus to Darius's death, barely 6 years. From Alexander's crossing of the Hellespont to the final subjugation of the eastern provinces, only a decade. How did this happen? How did 35,000 Macedonians destroy an empire of millions? The answer lies in multiple factors, each reinforcing the others. First, military superiority. The Macedonian phalanx, with its 18-foot pikes, was nearly invincible in frontal combat. The companion cavalry, trained to charge in wedge formation with devastating impact, could break any line. The integration of different military arms, heavy infantry, light infantry, cavalry, siege equipment, allowed tactical flexibility that Persian forces, cobbled together from diverse contingents with different training and equipment, could not match. Second, leadership. Alexander personally led his troops, sharing every danger. Inspiring fanatic loyalty, he made rapid decisions on the battlefield, exploiting opportunities before enemies could respond. His soldiers believed he was invincible, favored by the gods, destined for greatness, and this psychological certainty was itself a weapon. Third, strategic brilliance. Alexander understood that he need not conquer the entire empire province by province. If he destroyed Persian armies and captured the royal court, resistance would collapse. He targeted the center, the king, the capitals, the treasuries, and once these fell, the periphery surrendered without fighting. Fourth, Persian weakness. A century and a half of decline had hollowed out the empire from within. Satraps were semi-independent. Subject peoples lacked loyalty to distant kings. The military had not innovated since Xerxes. The court was consumed by intrigue rather than focused on governance. When crisis came, the empire lacked the cohesion to mount effective resistance. And finally, luck. Darius fled at Issus and Gaugamela at crucial moments. Tyre resisted just long enough to secure Alexander's coastal conquests without delaying him fatally. Egypt welcomed him as a liberator. The timing of his invasion coincided with Persian weakness and Macedonian strength. History turns on such contingencies. By 323 before the Common Era, Alexander is dead, killed by fever in Babylon at age 32, having conquered the known world but failed to organize his conquests into stable governance. His empire immediately fragments among his generals, the Diadochi, who spend decades fighting over its pieces. But the Persian Empire does not revive. Its time has passed. The Seleucid kingdom that emerges in the Near East is Persian in territory and administration, but Greek in language and culture. Later, the Parthian Empire and then the Sassanid Empire will resurrect something recognizably Persian, will claim continuity with the Achaemenids, will even adopt similar titles and ceremonies. But the direct line is broken, the dynasty extinct, the age ended. In 330 before the Common Era, when Persepolis burns and Darius dies in the desert, an epoch closes. The greatest empire of the ancient Near East, the first truly universal empire, the realm that united dozens of peoples under one sophisticated administrative system, passes into history. Its armies are scattered, its treasuries looted, its palaces ruined, its kings dead. The storm has passed, the destruction is complete, and in the smoking ruins of Persepolis, among the fallen columns and shattered statues, the Persian Empire breathes its last. What took 2 centuries to build has been destroyed in a decade, swept away by a young man's ambition and brilliance, by military innovation and strategic vision, by the inevitable cycle that raises empires to greatness and then casts them down into oblivion. But the story does not end here. For though the empire fell, its influence endured. Though the Achaemenid line was extinguished, the ideas and systems they created outlived them. The question is not whether empires end. All empires end, but what they leave behind, what lessons they teach, what inheritance they pass to the future. That inheritance, paradoxically, may be more durable than the empire itself. When empires fall, their physical structures crumble into dust. Palaces become ruins. Cities are abandoned. Armies disperse. Treasuries are looted. Within a generation, the living memory of imperial glory fades, and within a century, the empire itself becomes a subject for historians rather than a present reality. This is the fate of all empires, without exception. They rise, they flourish, they decline, they fall, and the world continues as if they never existed. Yet sometimes, rarely, but sometimes an empire leaves behind something more durable than stones and swords. Sometimes the ideas it embodied, the systems it created, the precedents it established, outlive the empire itself and shape civilizations that follow. The Persian Empire, destroyed so thoroughly by Alexander that its capital lay in ruins and its ruling dynasty was extinguished, nevertheless bequeathed to humanity a legacy that endures to this day, 23 centuries after its fall. Consider what Alexander did immediately after conquering Persia. He could have dismantled the administrative systems, imposed Macedonian governance, treated the conquered territories as provinces to be exploited. Instead, he largely adopted the Persian model. He kept the satrap system, appointing governors to administer vast regions with considerable autonomy. He maintained the Persian postal roads and way stations. He adopted elements of Persian court ceremony, the proskynesis, the ritual prostration before the king that scandalized his Macedonian companions, but was standard practice in Persian imperial protocol. Alexander even attempted to create a fusion of Persian and Macedonian elites, arranging mass marriages at Susa, where he and his officers wed Persian noblewomen. He trained Persian youths in Macedonian military tactics, intending to create a unified army that drew on both traditions. His vision, never fully realized before his death, was essentially Cyrus's vision renewed, a universal empire where diverse peoples maintained their identities while acknowledging a supreme central authority. When Alexander's empire fragmented after his death, his successors, the Diadochi, who carved kingdoms from his conquests, continued to govern in ways that owed more to Persian precedents than to Macedonian or Greek traditions. The Seleucid Empire, which controlled the Near East including Mesopotamia and much of Iran, was Greek in language and elite culture, but Persian in administrative structure and governance philosophy. The Seleucid kings called themselves Basileus, the Greek word for king, but they functioned as the heirs to Achaemenid imperialism, ruling vast territories through appointed governors, maintaining sophisticated communication systems, collecting regular tribute from subject peoples. Even the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt, though it presented itself as continuing pharaonic traditions, borrowed heavily from Persian administrative practices. The detailed tax records, the provincial structure, the royal monopolies on certain goods, these were refinements of systems the Persians had developed during their 2 centuries of rule. But Persian influence extended far beyond mere administrative convenience. The Romans, who would eventually absorb the Hellenistic kingdoms and create their own vast empire, studied Persian governance with interest. The Roman provincial system, with its appointed governors holding broad powers but remaining answerable to central authority, echoes the satrap model. The cursus publicus, the Roman imperial postal system, was directly inspired by the Persian example. The very concept of universal empire, one power encompassing diverse peoples united under one law, and one supreme ruler, owes much to the Persian precedent. Consider the Roman Emperor Diocletian, who in the 3rd century of the Common Era restructured the Roman Empire to address its near collapse. He divided the empire into provinces governed by vicars, created multiple layers of administration, established fixed tax rates, built an elaborate court ceremony designed to emphasize imperial majesty. These reforms, which arguably saved the Roman Empire for another 2 centuries, drew heavily on Persian models that had been preserved through Hellenistic intermediaries. Diocletian even adopted Persian royal dress and elaborate court rituals that emphasized the emperor's semi-divine status. The concept of the King of Kings, which the Achaemenid rulers claimed, became a model for imperial pretensions across millennia. The Parthian Empire, which arose in the 3rd century before the Common Era, as Persian power was being revived by Iranian peoples from the northeastern frontier, explicitly claimed to be the heir to the Achaemenids. The Parthian kings called themselves King of Kings, used similar royal iconography, and presented themselves as continuing the legitimate Persian imperial tradition. The Sassanid Empire, which overthrew the Parthians in 224 of the Common Era, went even further in claiming Achaemenid heritage. The Sassanid kings claimed direct descent from Achaemenid rulers, probably falsely, but what matters is that they found it necessary to claim such continuity. They modelled their court on Achaemenid precedents, adopted similar administrative systems, and explicitly presented their rule as the restoration of authentic Persian kingship after centuries of Hellenistic usurpation. Through the Sassanids, Persian imperial concepts influenced the nascent Islamic caliphates that conquered Iran in the 7th century. The Abbasid Caliphate, which moved its capital to Baghdad in the 8th century, adopted Persian administrative practices wholesale. The vizier, the powerful chief minister of Islamic empires, is a Persian institution. The elaborate court ceremonials of the caliphs, the division of territories into provinces administered by appointed governors, the sophisticated tax systems all show Persian influence mediated through centuries of continuous governance tradition. Even after the Islamic conquest, Persian cultural and administrative influence remained so powerful that historians speak of the Persianate world, a vast region stretching from Anatolia to India where, regardless of ethnic origin or official language, Persian culture, Persian literature, Persian administrative practices, and Persian political concepts shaped governance and high culture. The Mughal Empire in India, the Safavid Empire in Iran, the Ottoman Empire in Turkey, all these were Persianate empires, meaning they drew on a cultural and political inheritance that ultimately traced back to the Achaemenids. But Persian influence extended beyond governance into more subtle realms of thought and culture. Zoroastrianism, the religion that shaped Persian civilization, introduced concepts that would profoundly influence later religions. The idea of cosmic dualism, good versus evil, light versus darkness, truth versus falsehood, became central to how many cultures understood moral reality. The concept of individual moral responsibility, of each person's choices mattering in a cosmic struggle between good and evil, was revolutionary in its time and became foundational to ethical thought. Judaism, during the Babylonian exile and afterward under Persian rule, seems to have absorbed Zoroastrian influences. The elaborate angelology and demonology that appears in later Jewish texts, the concept of Satan as a cosmic opponent of God, the emphasis on eschatological judgment and final resurrection, these elements, largely absent from earlier Jewish thought, emerge during and after the Persian period. Whether through direct influence or parallel development in response to similar questions, the religious thought of Persian Zoroastrianism and Jewish monotheism engaged in a creative dialogue that shaped both traditions. Christianity, emerging from Jewish roots, inherited these concepts and developed them further. The Christian understanding of cosmic conflict between God and Satan, the emphasis on individual moral choice and its eternal consequences, the vision of final judgment and resurrection, all these bear the marks of ideas that flourished first in the Persian world. Islam, too, with its emphasis on the Day of Judgment, on individual accountability, on the struggle between righteousness and sin, shows the influence of Persian religious thought mediated through Jewish and Christian intermediaries. Even the idea of a Messiah, an anointed Savior, who will restore righteous order to the world, owes something to Persian influence. When the prophet Isaiah calls Cyrus the Lord's anointed one, he uses the Hebrew word Mashiach, from which Messiah derives. This application of messianic terminology to a Gentile king reflects how profoundly Persian imperial ideology, with its emphasis on the king as the restorer of cosmic order, influenced Jewish thought during and after the exile. Persian culture also left tangible legacies. Persian gardens, the Pyri-Deza, meaning enclosed park, from which we derive our word paradise, became the model for ornamental gardens across the Islamic world and eventually Europe. The concept of an ordered, beautiful space where water, plants, and architecture combine to create an earthly reflection of heavenly perfection spread from Persia throughout the civilized world. When the Mughals built the Taj Mahal, they surrounded it with Persian-style gardens. When Islamic rulers in Spain created the Alhambra, they included gardens based on Persian models. Even the formal gardens of European palaces owe something to this Persian inheritance. Persian art influenced visual culture across a vast region. The distinctive style of Persian miniature painting, which developed fully under later dynasties but had roots in the Achaemenid period, shaped Islamic art throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. Persian carpet weaving became legendary, with techniques and designs developed under Persian empires continuing to be valued millennia later. Persian architectural forms, the Iwan, the large vaulted hall open on one side, the dome on pendentives, the extensive use of coloured tiles influenced building across the Islamic world. Persian literature, particularly the poetry that flourished under later dynasties, but drew on traditions stretching back to Achaemenid times, became the gold standard for high culture across the Persianate world. When Mughal emperors in India wanted to demonstrate cultivation, they wrote poetry in Persian. When Ottoman officials wanted to prove their sophistication, they studied Persian literature. The Persian language itself became a lingua franca for administration and high culture across a vast territory, much as Latin did in medieval Europe or English does today. But perhaps the most important Persian legacy is conceptual. The idea that empire need not be synonymous with oppression, that diverse peoples can be unified without being homogenized, that tolerance is not weakness but strength. This was Cyrus's great insight, codified in the cylinder that bears his name, demonstrated in his treatment of conquered peoples, refined by Darius into a functioning system. Consider the alternative model available in the ancient Near East. The Assyrian Empire maintained control through calculated terror, mass deportations, brutal reprisals, policies designed to break the spirit of subject peoples. When Babylon conquered Judah, it destroyed Jerusalem and forcibly deported the Jewish elite. These were the norms of ancient imperialism. Conquest meant subjugation, resistance meant annihilation. Cyrus offered something different. He conquered Babylon but presented himself as Marduk's chosen one, the restorer of proper worship. He freed the Jews and funded the rebuilding of their temple. He allowed subject peoples to maintain their laws, religions, and customs as long as they acknowledged Persian sovereignty and paid their tribute. This was not democracy, it was still autocratic rule by a distant king, but it was a more humane imperialism, one that recognized that empires built on consent, however grudging, are more stable than empires built solely on force. This model influenced every subsequent attempt at universal empire. Alexander sought to unite Persians and Macedonians in a common enterprise. Rome granted citizenship to conquered peoples and incorporated their gods into the Roman pantheon. Islamic empires allowed Christians and Jews to practice their faiths as protected minorities. These policies were never purely idealistic. They reflected practical calculation about stability and control, but they traced their lineage back to Persian precedents. Even modern concepts of tolerance, of religious freedom, of cultural pluralism, owe something to the Persian experiment. When we speak of societies that unite diverse peoples while respecting their differences, when we envision political orders that encompass variety without demanding uniformity, we are working with concepts that the Achaemenid Empire pioneered. This is not to romanticize Persian rule or to claim that the Achaemenids were enlightened humanitarians. They were empire builders, concerned primarily with power and wealth. They could be ruthless when necessary, just ask the defenders of Tyre. They extracted enormous tribute from subject peoples to fund imperial luxuries. They maintained their rule through military force and the ever-present threat of violence. But within the constraints of ancient imperial systems, they created something remarkable. A Jew could worship Yahweh in Jerusalem, while a Babylonian worshipped Marduk in Babylon, and an Egyptian worshipped Amun in Memphis, all within the same empire, all under the same ultimate authority. A Greek merchant could trade with an Indian merchant using Persian roads and Persian currency. A Phoenician ship captain could sail secure waters, knowing that Persian power protected commerce. This was not freedom in any modern sense, but it was a more capacious imperial structure than had existed before. When we visit the ruins of Persepolis today, climbing those grand staircases where tribute-bearers are carved in eternal procession, we see the physical remnants of imperial ambition. The columns still rise toward the sky, though their roofs have long since collapsed. The reliefs still show delegates from 23 nations, though the empire they served is dust. The inscriptions still proclaim Darius as King of Kings, though his dynasty ended more than 2 millennia ago. But we should see more than ruins. We should see the birthplace of ideas that outlived the stones. The administrative sophistication that allowed one government to effectively manage territories spanning 3,000 miles. The communication systems that moved information with unprecedented speed. The religious tolerance that allowed diverse peoples to coexist. The cultural synthesis that took elements from Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Greek, and Iranian traditions and created something new. The Cyrus cylinder resides now in the British Museum, a small clay object easy to overlook among grander artifacts, but its message reverberates across centuries, that rulers have responsibilities to their subjects, that religious freedom matters, that diverse peoples can unite under just governance. When the United Nations was founded, a replica of the cylinder was placed in its headquarters, symbolically linking modern ideals of international cooperation to ancient Persian precedents. This is, perhaps, the ultimate irony, an empire destroyed so completely that its capital lay in ruins for 2 millennia nevertheless shaped the world that came after. The physical empire lasted barely 2 centuries. The influence has lasted 23 centuries and counting. Alexander conquered Persia's armies and burned Persepolis, but he could not destroy what the Persians had created in the realm of ideas and systems. The Seleucids fell to the Parthians, who fell to the Sassanids, who fell to the Arabs, but Persian administrative genius and cultural sophistication survived each transition, adapting but never disappearing. When Napoleon crowned himself emperor, he looked back to ancient models of universal rule, and among those models was Persia. When British imperial theorists tried to justify ruling India, they pointed to Persian precedents for tolerant governance of diverse peoples. When modern nations struggle to unite different ethnic and religious groups under one political order, they grapple with challenges the Persians faced and partially solved more than 2,000 years ago. The Achaemenid Empire rose from the Iranian plateau, built by horsemen who became kings, expanded by conquerors who became administrators, perfected by rulers who transformed military dominance into sophisticated governance. It fell to a young Macedonian's brilliance and ambition, destroyed with shocking speed, reduced to ruins and memories. But ruins can teach, memories can inspire. The dust of Persepolis still speaks to those willing to listen, telling of an empire that tried, however imperfectly, to create order without destroying diversity, to build unity while respecting difference, to wield power with at least occasional mercy. In the end, all empires fall. The Persian Empire is no exception. But some empires, in falling, nevertheless leave behind seeds that grow in unexpected places, that flower in later ages, that bear fruit for people who never knew the empire existed. The Persian Empire is such an empire destroyed but not dead, fallen but not forgotten, ancient but somehow still relevant to how we think about power, diversity, governance, and the possibilities of human political organization. Stand in the ruins of Persepolis on a clear night, as I began this journey asking you to imagine standing on the Iranian plateau 3,000 years ago. Look up at the same stars that Persian warriors saw, that Cyrus contemplated, that Darius studied. The constellations have not changed. The stars wheel in their eternal patterns, indifferent to human ambition and human failure. But on the earth below, everything changed. Empires rose and fell, peoples migrated and mingled, ideas spread and evolved. And through it all, the Persian experiment, that audacious attempt to unite the known world under one enlightened rule, left traces that persist to our own time. The empire died. Long live the empire's legacy. This is what history teaches, if we are wise enough to learn, that what we build in stone may crumble, but what we build in ideas and systems and precedents can endure long after the builders are forgotten. The Persians built an empire, and it fell, but they also built something else, a model, an inspiration, a demonstration of possibilities, and that has proven more durable than bronze and stone. 23 centuries after Alexander's conquest, the Persian Empire lives on, not in territory or governance, but in the inheritance it left to every civilization that came after, in administrative systems and cultural synthesis, in religious concepts and political philosophy, in gardens and carpets and poetry, in the very idea that empire can mean something other than mere domination in all these ways. The Persians achieved a kind of immortality. Empires rise and empires fall, but ideas, the right ideas, at the right time, expressed with sufficient force and implemented with sufficient skill, ideas can echo in eternity. The Persian Empire, which began with horsemen in the shadows and ended in flames at Persepolis, left such ideas behind, and we, inheritors of a complex history we are still working to understand, live within echoes of that ancient power. The story ends, where it must, in ruins and silence, but the meaning of the story extends far beyond its ending, into our own time, and if we are fortunate, into futures we cannot yet imagine. This is the strange glory of the Persian Empire, destroyed but somehow victorious, fallen but in some sense still standing, ancient but never quite obsolete. The last Achaemenid king died in a desert, abandoned by his followers, murdered by his own nobles. But Cyrus's dream of a unified world, Darius's vision of ordered diversity, the Persian experiment in imperial governance, these did not die. They transformed, adapted, influenced, inspired. They became part of the inheritance of civilization itself. And so the Persian Empire, though it fell, nevertheless endures not as an empire, but as an idea, a legacy, a testament to human ambition and achievement, a reminder that what we create can outlive us in unexpected ways, echoing in eternity long after the last stone has crumbled and the last memory has faded into history.